Good evening. Welcome to the school committee meeting on Monday, August 10th, 2020. Thank you for joining us tonight. As we get started, I wanted to make a brief statement. The last few weeks have been hard for everyone. And while we've all been frustrated at times, we're all here together working towards one goal, which is educating our students. We understand that the delay in this vote has been frustrating for parents and staff alike. Please understand that this decision is unlike any other this committee has ever been asked to make before. Last week, we asked for more information and for more time to process that information, and we really appreciate being given both. Our thanks to the administration for providing the information we needed and answers to our questions, and our thanks to the public for your patience during this time. Tonight, we will hear a final presentation from our administration regarding their recommendation to the committee, and then the choice before us tonight will be to select a model or truly a framework of sorts from which everything else will come. This will provide some certainty, but there will also be open questions that haven't been answered, details to clarify, and as we move closer to the fall and through the winter, this plan will take shape and it will evolve and adjust as needed. Our schools are being asked to undertake huge challenges under extraordinary circumstances and with very limited guidance from the state. The schools in our community, however, are up to that challenge, and together we will find a path forward. Public comment is open via the Airtable link tonight. It will appear in the chat. Unfortunately, as with our last meeting, I cannot guarantee that all of your questions will be addressed at this meeting. They are archived, and with hundreds of attendees, it just may not be possible for us to address those live, but those questions are informative to us to understand what information the public needs, and we hope to provide that in the coming weeks. Even if you haven't seen it discussed live on air in a meeting or raised by a committee member, please know that every angle has been looked at. Everything has been considered by the people before you tonight: students, staff, health, safety, transportation, facilities, equity, childcare, curriculum from kindergarten to high school, special education, English language learners, social emotional wellness. The people before you tonight, the committee, the staff, the administration, our reopening committees who have worked extraordinarily hard, have looked at this problem from every angle, and are facing an impossible situation and the need to balance a web of very complicated needs and interests. This is the hardest thing any of us have ever done. There's no manual, there's no roadmap, and there's going to be no answer that works for everyone. But the way we will get through it is together. And as we make this decision, we ask that everyone pause, take a breath, and then come together and join us in finding the path forward. We're one Westford and one Westford Public Schools. Thank you. And Bill, the floor is yours.
Just first, a couple of updates. I want to congratulate the staff and the students of Westford Academy for an outstanding graduation last Friday. It was so important that we recognize the students who have been through so much and have missed so much in their senior year. And it was, as always, very tastefully done. Everyone was just very, very happy. It was an event that we're always very proud of, between the planning that goes on and the behavior of our students. They're just outstanding. They were just a terrific class. So congratulations to everyone. I want to thank the Special Education Parent Advisory Council for the excellent data that they have sent us from the survey that they conducted. It was very, very well done. Lots of information, really articulating once again what we know, and that is that the very special needs of some of our students um, need to be met. And we intend to meet those needs in this plan that we're going to propose tonight. I do want to let you know also that I did receive a phone call this afternoon from Dan Anderson, who was the person responsible for reviewing our preliminary reopening plan that was submitted um, last week. First of all, he said it was an excellent plan. When he wanted to make sure a couple of small items that he pointed out, and he has mentioned these to most all of the school systems, if not all others, and that is we need to be careful and pay attention to the structured learning time, otherwise known as time on learning, and also that he would like to see a little bit more information in terms of how we plan to meet the special needs, educational needs of English language learners, which we will certainly articulate to a greater extent in the final plan that we submit this week to the Commissioner's office. But he was very pleased. As I said, he thought it was very well done, and we had a great team that put a lot of work into it. So, with that being said, I'm not sure, Kerry, if you have any other update, or Ingrid. If not, we'll go right into the business at hand. Okay.
Maybe before we get to business, I'm noticing the number of attendees we do have on this meeting, and it is growing rapidly. We are at 436 participants. There is a limit of 500 participants on the Zoom call. So if you have the capability of watching this meeting on Westford Cat through Westford Cat online streaming or Westford Cat on your television, and you can make another spot available for someone to sign on to the Zoom, thank you for doing so. Or if you have a friend who's messaging you saying, I can't get into the Zoom, if by chance we do reach the 500 person limit, please let other people know through messaging or social media that they can watch on Westford Cat through Westford Cat live streaming or Westford Cat on their televisions. So there are other options to access the meeting. We want to make sure everyone who needs to be here can sign on. There was one other matter of public comment that I felt I should address before the main presentation. We recognize the incongruity of taking a vote regarding the reopening of schools over a remote meeting. To be honest, I've wrestled with that as a new committee chair, trying and at times struggling to figure out how to run an effective meeting under extreme conditions. So my decision to this point has been to retain our online meeting format. Please know that is not because this committee is unwilling to meet in person, and we have done so as needed, in particular for union matters and at their request. I personally was in 3 such meetings at central office on Monday. So the reason for keeping these community public meetings online is that they need to be public and they are for the entire community. So we routinely, as I just indicated, have hundreds of attendees online who may have a range of unknown medical or accessibility needs. By keeping our meetings online, we're maximizing our ability to communicate with you, the public, and to try and have us in person and remote access for the public would really pose numerous technological and accessibility challenges that we'd have to solve. And I haven't really wanted to impose that additional burden of time and logistics on our already overburdened administration, who is extraordinarily busy with these reopening plans. So if anyone has difficulty with the fact that this meeting is online, that's on me. I made that decision as a chair, and I am certainly open to other opinions though, and would appreciate hearing the committee's feedback and perspective on if we should change that procedure in the future. So committee members, I don't know that we need to take time about it live this evening and delay the main event, but I did want to share that with you that if anyone has difficulty, that was my decision up until now. And if we need to change that practice, please let me know your thoughts. Okay. Thanks, Bill.
All right. The brief presentation that Carrie and I and others are going to make tonight will provide a little bit more clarification in terms of why we recommended what we did in our report. So the nexus of all recommendations, whether it be academic or health and safety. In the development of our reopening plan and the recommendation of the hybrid model and the particular model that was recommended by the reopening committee. And I want to thank the outstanding work of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee for the extensive discussions that they had. We tried to meet 3 different goals, and those goals have been articulated throughout the last 2 months by the Commissioner of Education. He would like school systems to make every effort to bring students back into school or in-person instruction. He would like us to minimize the size of cohorts and also minimize the opportunities for larger groups assembling in a school. So with those 3 guidance directives that have been placed before all school systems, we came up with a recommendation of the hybrid model that Kerry and I believe Chris and Lori and Courtney will address. But first comes the prerequisite of meeting the health and safety requirements. In his guidance in late June, the commissioner made it clear that there were certain conditions of health and safety that needed to be met. And I believe we have done an excellent job in the operations subcommittee and the hygiene protocols subcommittee in meeting these safety measures. First of all, we are in the process. It began last week of having our HVAC system assessed. I have the paperwork here of the scope and work of EFI Global, an engineering firm that specializes in HVAC review. And they have been reviewing all of our buildings to verify the HVAC systems are operating and functioning properly related to ventilation. And their job was also to identify any areas that need to be worked on. And we will pursue those immediately. They are also in the process of conducting a baseline air quality test in all buildings. Now, I understand that there are no occupants in the buildings right now, and that's why I refer to them as baseline. That we want to make sure the air quality that is excellent at the present time is maintained with occupancy of the buildings. We are in the process and have been procuring MERV 13 filters. They are a more dense filter that filters more particulate matter out of the air and our units where they fit, and they will fit most units in our school system. These will be installed. There are a few of the units that the MERV 13 filters are a little bit difficult in terms of fitting them in. We will try our best. If not, we will go in those very few units with the MERV 8, which are also a very acceptable filter in terms of filtration. The Department of Education, as you know, issued guidance that indicated that kindergarten and first grade students did not have to wear masks. Well, our approach is that all students and all staff will wear masks because that has been shown to be the sort of the front line of defense in terms of aerosolized moisture that may be emitted from a person's mouth or nasal passages. And it's extremely important that we have students and staff wearing masks. We are going with a CDC recommendation of 6 feet of distancing. As you know, in the guidance in late June, the Commissioner of Education indicated that with appropriate masking of students and staff, that 3 feet of distancing would be acceptable. We don't feel that's the case in Westford. Other school systems might, but not here. The CDC has indicated that close contact is determined by less than 6 feet of distancing for a period of greater than 15 minutes. So if we were to have students 3 feet apart in our classrooms, even with half the number of students in at a time. That puts them within that risk zone, and we're not willing to do that. We will be following the cleaning and disinfecting procedures of the Center for Disease Control. We have this document that I've reviewed with our Facilities Director, Paul Fox. It is the guidance for cleaning and disinfecting public spaces, workplaces, businesses, and schools from the CDC, and we will be following all the procedures of cleaning and disinfecting that they recommend. In terms of transportation, there will be only one child per seat on the school buses, and those school buses will be disinfected in between each run. Now, therein lies the issue that we could be, in fact, altering some school times, some beginning times at the beginning of the day and ending times at the end of the day. We're meeting again this week to try and run kind of a simulation in terms of how long that might take. We're going to be speaking with the bus company because we think it's going to be difficult in hiring bus monitors, because it's difficult for all bus contractors right now to hire bus drivers. They're in short supply. So we're going to talk with the bus company about the idea of having the bus drivers do the disinfecting immediately upon the departure and disembarking of students. Now, just to know, when students enter a bus, they will begin and go through the back of the bus and fill towards the front. When exiting the bus, the first students in front of the bus will exit first. That way it minimizes contact of students passing each other. We will have monitored transitions in the school while the students are in during those school hours, whether it be to any mask breaks, any potential recess break, bathroom breaks, etc. There will be no sharing materials by students. Each student will have their own materials and will maintain those materials. The plan that we have proposed and still very enthusiastically recommending is no in-school lunch. That presents problems for us if there was lunch in school, in that, please keep in mind, students need to be 6 feet distance. They would obviously have their masks removed, but they have to be facing in one direction, in the same direction. So that greatly limits the number of students that can eat lunch at any one time, and therefore would exponentially increase the number of lunch periods that would have to be conducted during the day, greatly impacting the afternoon instructional time if we had students in school for the full day. We will have caring rooms that will be set up with screens and cots, with a portable air cleaning device in the caring rooms. Also, these are rooms that a student will go to if they present symptoms, and they will wait there until the parents come to pick them up. We have recommended, and are still recommending, no extended use of the facilities that will require and tax to a greater extent than normal our custodial staff in terms of cleaning and disinfecting. We have a whole list that our nurses and the town health department staff have worked on in terms of protocols, in terms of what happens if a student presents symptoms or a staff member presents symptoms. What is the process that is followed? And we follow the DPH guidelines also in terms of contact tracing. Do a limited number of students need to be quarantined, the whole class, the whole school? That is on a case-by-case basis. Right? And we've been in close contact with the Westford Health Department on that, and are following DPH guidelines. Okay? And we have made a significant investment in personal protection equipment, masks, shields, clear face shields that sometimes staff will use, particularly in areas of speech pathology where students need to see the formation of the mouth. Ordering gowns for our staff who interact with students with severe disabilities or more serious disabilities, who may be more prone in terms of coughing and sneezing and moisture emittal. Wipes that will be used to wipe down surfaces, and disinfecting wipes plexiglass dividers. A limited number of those, not one for every student, not one for every desk, because that becomes quite unwieldy. Goggles have been ordered along with protective glasses. We would give staff the choice of whether they wanted to wear protective glasses or goggles, because that is an area of transmission through the eyes. A limited number of staff, particularly working with students with severe disabilities, would also have scrubs, okay, um, and hospital garb. Lots and lots of hand sanitizer. And we've invested heavily in electrostatic sprayers, not only sort of mobile units and backpacks, but also handheld electrostatic sprayers that emit a mist of disinfectant that will be used on surfaces in the schools, but also in our school buses. So we've taken our responsibility to health and safety for our students and our staff very, very seriously, not cutting any corners. And so with that being said, with that backdrop of trying to create a healthy environment, I'll turn it over to Kerry.
Sure. So with us this evening, we have Dr. Chu, who is the principal of the Stony Brook, and Mrs. McDermott, who is the principal of the Abbott. They are both very actively involved in the teaching and learning subcommittee, and they just want to remind the listeners and the school committee how we got here to this particular proposal before you. So I'll turn it over to Chris and Laurie.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have our abbreviated journey here. Instead of taking everybody all the way back to the very beginning, and like the superintendent has said, we have looked at all these different models. We were charged with creating 3 different models in the very beginning, and we were told to prioritize a full in-person return. So that is how we started as a leadership team. We needed to look at what those options were. We looked at all of the different safety requirements that were being presented to us, and we were measuring classrooms. We were setting up desks. We were looking to see what we'd be able to fit, where we'd be able to fit things. Each principal was also creating what our school day as it is right now would have to look like with all of these transitions that would take place. So we were all, even independently at our grade levels, reimagining what those schedules would look like. And as we continued to look at all the different safety requirements, as more and more regulations came out, we just looked at everything that we were studying. And after the feedback that we had from our staff and from families and just different conversations that we were having, we agreed that really the 6-foot distancing, although the state was saying that we should be looking at 3-foot to 6-foot distancing to fit everybody in, we decided that we just weren't comfortable going below the 6-foot distancing. And once we did that, it really put us in a position where we had no other option than a hybrid, because we knew that we wouldn't be able to bring all of our students into the buildings at that time. The thing that came out as the largest issue for us, it sounds odd, but it is, like the superintendent said, it is the lunches. And in order to effectively create an environment where the students would still be safe, and all of the other safety planning that we were putting into place that would still be able to exist, and having this lunch wouldn't compromise all of those efforts, we found that we just weren't able to fit that in. So we started looking at, okay, what could other options be? How could we solve this problem? And we just kept coming back to these conversations, and it was honestly, it came out of the wonderful creativity of the members of our committee, because we're encouraging everybody to think creatively, which is a hallmark of our district. I mean, we're an incredibly innovative district, and when we came back, a number of people had said, well, if we actually were able to hand out bagged lunches and the students ate them at home, then how could we increase our ability to effectively work with students in a remote environment as well? So what if we did look at this early release half-day model? And that's when we really started looking at all of the different possibilities that could exist there. And that's when we found that by the hybrid that we've presented is the only plan that involves any type of hybrid activity that allows the students and the teachers to connect every single day. So it maximizes that teacher-student interaction. It optimizes students' ability to work in an environment that is comfortable and flexible, because the classrooms are going to be very rigid and very static. They're not going to be able to move about the classrooms. All of the movement opportunities that we've been embedding into school in every grade level over the number of years is all going to disappear. And so we really wanted to decrease the amount of time that students needed to remain in that environment, so that we could still get that opportunity for the in-person instruction, get that opportunity for the students and the teachers to be meeting face to face, but then we would be able to extend those additional opportunities remotely. And so all of these different conversations we are having, we looked at a plethora of schedules, looking at just what it could look like, even when we were still looking at a hybrid and the full day return, looking at the different models that have been suggested. We had looked at all of those different pieces. As different districts came out with their plans, we looked at their plans. I would say some of the districts that introduced plans earlier, which I know frustrated some of our community members because we hadn't released our plan yet, many of those plans have already changed since they had actually released them as well too. So we were continuing to try to maintain this deliberate conversation about what we think was the best model for these things. And that's how we got to this point at this moment in time. And we have other slides that we want to talk about. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. McDermott.
Well, I also wanted to add to the lunch conversation, because I know that that's a frustrating one for families who are looking for a more of a full day hybrid return. And as far as the Teaching and Learning Committee goes, and along with the leadership team, we really have tried to think outside the box on that to keep it as safe as possible, but we keep landing on a feeling that it isn't safe. We have, just to provide a little clarity, because I know that, it's hard to envision, but some of the guidance suggested that we could have lunch in the classrooms. So to speak to Abbott, because that's where I am, our classroom, some of our classrooms are 600 square feet. So we're taking masks off, inviting children to eat lunch. Yes, there's 10, 11 to 12 kids sitting 6 feet apart, eating their lunch. Now we need to find a spot for all of the teachers to safely eat their lunch. That wouldn't be, at that time, there would be supervision for the students, because the teachers obviously have their own lunchtime. So then we looked, well, the classroom is not going to feel comfortable for a lot of families, and we're not particularly comfortable with it. So what else can we do? So we looked at, splitting the lunches, using alternative spaces like partial in the cafeteria, because believe it or not, we can't even fit them all 6 feet apart for lunch. If you think of the long cafeteria tables that a lot of the schools have, we can fit 2 children at a table that we could normally seat 24 children, because the children need to be 6 feet apart, and each table that's connected is 6 feet, and we all have to be facing the same direction. So I can do that in the Abbott Gymnasium. We could move physical education, possibly outside, possibly in the classrooms, possibly in the cafeteria if I'm using the gymnasium, right? We could probably make that happen. And now we have about 70 students eating together in the gymnasium and 6 feet apart in an enclosed space. I know I haven't eaten with 70 people in an enclosed space. I don't know that there are many families that have, but these are the things that we're vetting through, trying to determine, is this the safest environment that we can provide for our students for what ends up being about 15 to 20 minutes of additional instructional time per day if we go full day. So that brings us to the next slide.
And additionally, I would just say the other additional point to that, that we were talking about is, again, not only they're going to be spaced out in such a way that just the social impact, again, that people think that kids are going to be coming together for these socialization, and they're just not going to be able to talk to each other. And it actually expands that notion. Every single year, we are so concerned and focused on watching where students are choosing to eat lunch, and is everybody finding a peer and a person to sit with and talk with and eat with. And if we see somebody who's struggling to find any of those connections, then we'll look to see how can we help to support them and to help with those connections. Well, now we're talking about all of our students are going to be in that position. Everyone's going to be sitting by themselves and just eating their lunch. So we might change the environment, but it's not going to increase the connectedness for the students. And I'm not sure if people really understand that.
Yeah, and not to mention that we also have to clean in between those lunches. And our first lunch at Abbott, we start school 8:25, we end at 2:30. Our first lunch already starts at 10:45. So now we're talking about having to shift those times because everything's going to take a little bit longer. If we're cleaning those long tables, that's certainly easier. But a lot of schools won't have those, and we would have to have individual desks and chairs that would also need to be meticulously cleaned to be ready for the next group. So all I'm trying to do is provide a little more clarity around the logistics, because I do want the public to know that we didn't throw our hands up at lunch and say, it would just be a whole lot easier if we just didn't serve lunch, so let's do this. We really have vetted this through several hours of meetings to try to find a way, in a proactive way, to make this work. And it's how we arrived at providing the bagged lunches, because we were first hung up on getting the students safely through the lines and minimizing those transitions and passing times. And I haven't even gotten into the recess that is also super challenging, to keep kids separated at recess time in their classroom pods, sharing. We're looking at sharing the playground. So one day one class is going to get to play on maybe the structure. I'm not even sure if that would even be open. One class would have to play over in the basketball area. One class would have to play on the blacktop, and we would rotate that. So now we're, trying to manage that to make sure that there's no cross contamination and mixing of those groups. Not the fun recess that we would hope for. And again, taking away valuable learning time where kids can, in the hybrid model that we're proposing, they can go home, have their lunch, take off their mask, get some exercise, and engage in face-to-face. I know it's not in person, but it is face-to-face, mask-free, that also provides incredible benefits that we're not going to be able to accomplish wearing the masks. So we're going to take away the issues of being able to hear and understand in terms of teaching. I know I'm speaking to elementary, but in terms of teaching reading, it's very important that students can see our mouths and hear us clearly. So we did feel that there were certainly some instructional benefits of getting the students home. And I know I've mentioned this before, but the movement, all kids, not just young kids, need to move. And there is a lack of movement in the regulations that we would be going back to school with. And I worry about many of our students managing through those and being able to access and focus through the curriculum. We heard you loud and clear in terms of the issues around childcare, and never for 1 minute have we discounted that. And I think I mentioned, 2 meetings ago, how, that was one of the things that we kept getting really stuck on. Every model that we came up with was just not going to work for all families. And that's where we are. I don't know that there's any one model, even the full day model. I think right now, we would start hearing from people who don't feel comfortable sending their students back for the full day and don't feel comfortable having their students eating lunch at the school. We're working hard to try to come up with some potential scenarios for partnerships with the community that I'll ask the superintendent to speak about in just a minute. Mm-hmm. heard you loud and clear on, the feeling like you're feeling that the full day would provide so much more instructional time. And when we do the math, like I mentioned, there's really only an average increase of about 15 to 20 minutes when you figure in the time for lunch, the time for recess, the time for mass breaks, the hand washing, the transitions, and
the quality of the time too. There's really no comparison to that, again, because it's just it's a great concern that we have about what the classrooms are going to need to look like, and then just the amount of time in the afternoon being even more difficult to access because there's just going to be a larger sense of fatigue and exhaustion without the ability to have as much movement as we have already embedded in every single grade level.
We also understand that this, the kindergarten model as it is not preferred. We're looking to be creative in how we can. One of the things that we like about our hybrid model is that the students do have that in-person connection with a teacher every day. And so we're trying to think outside the box, and we'll be exploring this a little more with the teaching and learning committee and the kindergarten teachers to see how can we partner the teacher and the teaching assistant to manage that time, so that maybe the teaching assistant is working with the in-school pod A while the teacher actually gets to check in and work with the remote pod B. So I think that we can be creative in working through some of those connection issues as well. And I have to say, our teachers are so incredibly innovative. And even though they are off, I get emails all the time about schedule ideas and different ways to solve so many of the issues that they're hearing that we're faced with. And I have no doubt that that's going to continue. We've also heard concerns around just what happens for these students, that parents are worried about their students in the remote learning setting. And I think some of it comes from their experience in the spring. And, the experience in the spring, like we've mentioned, is incredibly different from what we're planning for the fall. There's nothing the same about them, except that we do have to incorporate this remote learning, but it is going to be very, very different. The teachers, the way that was set up in a way to offer flexibility to families that were in a crisis situation, that we knew that we couldn't ensure that all students were available for live in-person instruction. And we were trying to be very thoughtful and respectful in that regard. And that's why we made the videos so that students could access those instructional videos whenever it was convenient for them. They could watch them and rewatch them as they needed to. And then, as that whole thing was unfolding, we tried to continue to incorporate new learning standards and things like that. But we know that is not the Westford standard, and that's not the Westford standard that any of our teachers want, or that any of you want, or that any of us want. So we are excited to continue to work on growing our remote learning model, whether it's in the hybrid or the Remote Learning Academy. And we're not going to let anybody fall through the cracks. We have support systems in place. And I know that at the elementary level anyway, I know that we had to use some of those. I had teachers visiting students in their driveways, trying to help them work through some of the engagement issues and things like that. Teams come together, support personnel, administrators calling parents and pulling teachers together. And it was an all hands on deck approach that will continue, especially now, because we are taking away some of that flexibility, and there will be expectations that we will be holding students accountable for. And we will do everything we can to support families through that. So we wanted you to understand that we know where you're coming from in terms of making any of these situations work. If you are a working parent, I am. And the other thing that has come up is, could we have different models for younger students and older students? And I think that's a kind of a dangerous game of whack-a-mole in some ways. I think there are many older students that are we can't assume because a student is older that they're just going to engage in their remote learning as we would like them to. I think that every family is looking at this through their own lens, and they all have their own challenges. So with that said, I will pass it over
Well,
to.
I'd just say quickly in that same vein, the middle school and the academy, we were also dealing in the spring with supporting students who both were struggling to access the resources, struggling to get online, and some who were just didn't want to be doing it. And so we found that we were using the same types of supports that we would use when there's any type of struggle with students engaging in the classroom in the first place. And so it was just like Lori had said. I mean, our guidance counselors and our teachers were reaching out to families and reaching out to students. The difference, I think, with the spring and what we anticipate seeing in the fall is that we also still knew that in this emergency situation, everything was changing so quickly that we were also encouraging all of our teachers to remain as flexible as possible. So if a student hadn't logged in and gone to an office hour, but had been doing the work, then we knew that the student and the teacher were still in connection with each other. So we wouldn't be as quick. We weren't as quick in the spring always to just assume that there was a problem unless we were already in communication with the families. But moving forward, there's going to be very specific attendance expectations and grading expectations that are going to exist in the fall with all of our the remote learning pieces, which is going to bring us much closer to the experience that students have in person, and all of those supports will still be in place to help students if they're struggling with any of those things. Plus, there's even more places for red flags if we see that there's any type of struggle going on in the first place.
And our goal, in this model is surely to make sure that every student and every family feels just as much a part of our learning community as they always have been. It's just going to look, a little bit different, but we still want to feel like we're all a part of our school families. And administrators and teachers, I know, would agree that we're going to go to the ends of the earth to make that happen. And we want to partner with you to ensure that our students are feeling connected and that you're feeling supported. And I'll wrap up. We want to keep this brief, but I do want you to know that it's, again, none of these situations are going to work for everybody. The hard part for us is parents look to us and ask, is it safe to send my student back to school? Teachers are reaching out to us, is it safe for me to come back to work? And while I can't promise anybody safety, I can lay my head down at night and know that we have put in every recommended safety guideline for our students and our families, and hope that we can keep everybody safe and continue learning and hopefully get back to in-person school the way that we know it.
Gloria, I'd like to go back up to number one just for a minute. Today we had a meeting with some representatives. Avery Adam, committee member Avery Adam, representing the Road and Bush. Avery and I met with also representatives of Westford Recreation Department, Millworks, and Kids League. And we know that there are 5 or 6 other childcare centers in Westford, beginning to brainstorm in terms of how we can help meet some of the needs of families, because we know that a full return is off the table because we can't meet the health and safety standards that we have put into place that meet the CDC and Department of Public Health guidelines. So the two alternatives are a hybrid model and a fully remote model, both of which present family issues in terms of childcare abilities of parents to get to work. So that we're trying to put our resources together in this great community and see what we can come up with. We don't think we'll be able to help everyone because the numbers are just probably too great. But we're going to see what we can come up with in working with the Millworks and the Westford Recreation Department, the Road and Bush, and childcare centers to help after school, that period of time when children are finished with their instruction. And also, while students are in school and in-person learning, help those students who are at home on a remote basis, keeping in mind that childcare basically has to be of an instructional nature. In other words, a student sitting with a laptop responsible for academic work. It's not out on the soccer field or playing volleyball or basketball or floor hockey. It's while the school hours are in session from the morning until the afternoon, there are certain academic tasks that our students would have to accomplish. And so that's what we're beginning to talk about. I'm meeting with members of the Recreation Commission, Michelle Collette, and also Christy Bates, this Wednesday to take a look at some available rooms at the Millennium School that were formerly occupied by the preschool program. As you know, that program is out in the K-2 schools for the upcoming school year. And so we're looking at every possible alternative to try and piece something together to help as many people as possible.
Okay, so that hopefully just kind of gave you a recap of where we went in terms of this process and why we landed on the hybrid early release model that we landed on, and also acknowledging some of the parent concerns and trying our very best to help mitigate those to the best of our ability, knowing that we aren't going to be able to solve all of these issues, because regardless of thought that has gone into a plan, we know that it's not a normal return to school. And with that, there are holes in each of the plans, but we do believe that this is the best plan for our staff and students. So now I would like to spend the next few minutes talking about some of the information that we didn't have answers to, and now we're starting to be able to frame answers a little bit better and more thoroughly. The first couple, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney Moran, Director of Pupil Services, and she's going to share about the preschool schedules, which we have not showcased yet to this point, as well as the students who are in our separate classrooms based on their special needs and the services that they require. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Courtney.
Okay, thank you. So as you can imagine, I've been receiving a lot of questions as well, asking about what my child's services might look like. Also wondering why we haven't heard separately from special education in terms of a subcommittee meeting. And I think that what's important to realize is that special education exists because of general education, because of our free and appropriate education that we do provide to all students. And so as part of the teaching and learning subcommittee, I looked at this as here's our pace car. And we were charged with, as everybody has stated, coming up with those 3 different models, looking at health and safety as, number one, and really making sure that the instruction that we're going to provide to our students is going to be high quality for that entire time. So before we can start folding in special education. So when thinking about what your child's services might look like, it's a very lofty question to answer. It's complicated. It's because we service students with a very wide range of skill sets. We also provide services for students that are ages 3 to 22. So what also complicates this model a bit is that we need to wait to find out where our students are going to land, what our district is going to require for services, whether in hybrid or remote or full return, as well as what the individual family decision will be. Then in addition to that, there are some areas where general education might tap out if a parent chooses homeschooling and or private school. Special education can't do that. For families who are still going to choose homeschooling and or enroll in a private school or a parochial school, and they choose to still access their child's special education services, we do have an obligation to provide those services. So now we have quite a big range of what we need to meet. But in short, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is telling the districts that we do need to deliver services that are on that IEP to the greatest extent possible. So unlike the spring, when we knew that there were services that we just couldn't deliver, the Department of Ed is saying, deliver the services. And that's really where we're working hard to see how we're going to do that with fidelity. The Department of Ed is also telling us to maximize all of in-person services to the best of our ability. So regardless of the family decisions, services will include both in-person and remote. Lori gave a great example of when instructing students how to read. We don't want a mask as a barrier. We don't even want a plexiglass as a barrier to muffle sounds. And there are other skill sets, such as speech and language, maybe for our students who are deaf, hard of hearing, where that's also going to be very key into not having those additional PPE barriers when instructing students. So services will both be in-person and remote, and those remote services will also be both live sessions as well as the pre-recorded videos. These are all acceptable means of delivering services according to the Department of Education, and we will continue to do that. Other services that will continue, I've stated in previous meetings, so I'll just be brief. We will be having team meetings for all of our students, whether they're annual meetings or redetermining eligibility. We will also continue with all of our child find activities, which includes partnering with early intervention as well as our own IST process in district. Now, several populations are definitely outliers, and one of those includes our preschool population. So these are our youngest learners that we start evaluating at 2.9 years old. And on their third birthday, whichever day they turn 3, they are coming to school if they are eligible for services. This is also our population of learners who are least likely to be independent when accessing remote education. So for our preschool services, we also have a very big range of services. Some students come in for itinerant services. That means by schedule, they come in for speech and language services twice a week. Maybe they come in for their physical therapy. Maybe they come in for occupational therapy. There are also students that qualify for a preschool integrated experience or a sub-separate preschool experience. And those schedules could range anywhere from 2 half days a week all the way up to 2.5 days and full days a week. And so at this time, we are looking at who those students are that fit into each one of those categories. And we're looking to group them into whether you call it pod A, B, and C, or if we're going to call them groups 1, 2, and 3. But group 1 would be our full day students. And those students would come in Monday through Friday from the hours of 9:05 to 12:20. Those are the hours that right now we are proposing as part of the hybrid model. There could be some changes depending on the vote, as well as what transportation might look like. We might need some wiggle room to space out our transportation needs. We'll then have 2 different groups of students who are accessing either Monday, Wednesday, Friday of in-person services, or a Tuesday, Thursday in-person services. Again, both of those groups would follow the 9:05 to 2:20. So in looking at why not having our students in for the full day, there are certainly some things that we are trying to avoid. First of all, we know that our preschoolers are not going to be wearing masks. And this would require our teachers to, in some situations, double up on the PPE that they have, which certainly is a challenge to get through a full day with double the PPE that their other colleagues may not be wearing at that time. We're also looking at avoiding the lunch hour, which is definitely more complicated with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and helping out, juice boxes and that type of thing, and heating up chicken nuggets, which does come in as a request from time to time. We are also avoiding the nap time, not to have the pillow, the stuffed animal, the blanket come in that would require daily washing or to go home back and forth. So those are some of the things that we're keeping our eye on. And then also just avoiding the constant separation of trying to keep 3-year-olds from gravitating towards each other or gravitating towards a teacher. The last thing we want to do is to push a student away in any way, but certainly we have to remind them of social distancing. Now, we have stolen some great ideas from other daycares that have already opened. In fact, one of our student support leaders drops her child off at their daycare, and they have hula hoops that they use as their personal space. And so this is our own form of PPE, so to speak, that we'll be using with our youngest learners to try to get them to still be able to enjoy floor time, but to stay within their hula hoop. So there's a lot of creative ideas that are out there and that we are just soaking in every time we hear one that definitely would make sense or definitely worth giving it a shot to maximizing our in-person services. Our other group of students that we would like to see on a regular basis and not rotating on an A week or a B week would be our special education students in our sub-separate programs. And these are the students who receive more than 75% of their services outside of the mainstream already dictated on their IEP. Whether they might be part of our REACH program from preschool on up to high school, or if they're in another sub-separate program, we would like to maximize their time that they're in front of the teachers. So they would be, regardless of an A week or a B week or whatever hybrid we decide, their participation would be a Monday through Friday participation as well. What's difficult is being able to articulate this to all of the parents so that it is individualized to their own child's needs. And we have over 800 students that do receive some sort of special education services from the district. And in order to provide family members with schedules, we will be waiting until the school year begins so that liaisons can take a look at their caseload, understand what choice the parent has made for their child, whether it's hybrid, whether it's remote, whether it's homeschooling or private school. And then looking at the IEP and mapping out where their services will look like. In the spring, we developed individualized remote learning plans, and we provided that to the parents. There isn't a directive from the department to do that again. The directive is to follow the IEP. This time, in addition to the IEP, the directive is to make sure that there is clear communication to the families, and that involves the families in making this decision and understanding how we're going to provide services. What will those services look like? When can they be expected? Etc. That is the work that needs to be done at the school level by the therapists who are assigned to the students and by the liaisons that are assigned to the students. That would be an impossible task to accomplish with any kind of fidelity from just me alone. And I say me because I'm the only one in the special education department that's currently working. So those services need to be articulated by the teachers at each of the schoolhouse levels. And so, in short, again, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is saying, deliver the services that are on the IEP. Deliver them to the maximum extent possible. If there is any kind of an issue, make sure that that is fully communicated with family members. Involve family members when you are making these decisions so that they understand what OT will look like, what PT will look like, whether that is remote or in person, there might also be an opportunity where some case managers might call special education students in if we're able to arrange that arrangement with individual families and transportation to come in the afternoon, whether it's for targeted instruction, whether it's for benchmark testing, or to fulfill our obligation around conducting reevaluations to the best of our abilities. So those would all be done by appointment if necessary. And so I think that's it, Carrie.
Thank you. So in addition to the preschool piece and the students who are in separate classrooms due to the needs outlined in their IEP and their learning needs, I do also want to close the loop a little bit further on the Remote Learning Academy model. We do have additional information. We discussed it this morning at our Teaching and Learning Subcommittee, which, as we've mentioned before, includes administrators, including the special education director, myself, director of digital learning, some principals, along with digital learning specialists, teachers at all levels, elementary, middle school, and high school. So we had started this discussion after we began shaping the framework of the 3 models, knowing that there would be some group of parents who choose to keep their child home, even if the school does return in some way, including in a hybrid fashion. So I just kind of want to go over what that looks like. I talked a little bit about this on Wednesday evening of last week, and there were still, at the high school level in particular, a little bit of ambiguity, and we've started to iron that out even further. So for starters, we have at the elementary level, what we would be doing is looking to select teachers who already exist in Westford Public Schools at each of the grade levels in order to teach the students who are selecting to be in the Remote Learning Academy. So while most teachers would be teaching, if the committee were to move forward in a hybrid model, their pods A and pods B, as we've outlined in previous meetings, the remote learning teacher would be doing a mixture of some in-person and remote learning, or very well may be assigned as a fully remote learning academy teacher. So for example, this is a mock schedule with hypothetical numbers. So let's take grade 2 at any one of the schools, and we have 21 students who have expressed the desire to not pursue a hybrid model and instead stick to the Remote Learning Academy. So they want to learn remotely full-time from home. And so in this case, you can see at this particular school in grade 2, there are 5 second grade teachers. And underneath each teacher, the numbers in parentheses is the class size assigned to that teacher. So again, like a typical normal year, each teacher would have about 18 to 20 to 22, in some cases to 23 students. And in this particular case, at grade 2, which this number was a real number for one of the schools, there were 21 students at that school in second grade who chose remote learning as their option. So in this case, we would separate that as one of the 5 teachers would separate their children, their remote learning academy children. So they'd be the designated remote learning teacher. And that teacher would teach just like every other teacher with the hybrid model. He or she would have 21 students. If you're looking at teacher 5, and I've marked those remote learning students in red. And in pod A, there would be 11 of those remote learning students. And then in pod B, there would be 10. So in the week where pod A, for all of the rest of the teachers are in school, well, teacher 5 wouldn't have anybody showing up in their classroom. Instead, they would log on live with those 11 students and teach the same content live throughout the day to pod A. Pod A would log off at the early release time, just like their Pod A peers that do come to school with teachers 1 through 4. And then they would finish their day asynchronously, remotely, while the teacher then logs on to provide Pod B, the 10 in Pod B, with that 90 or so minutes live instruction in the afternoon. So it would be mimicking the hybrid model, but instead of when the students are live, the teacher will be on live with them remotely instead. This is a scenario where the numbers worked out beautifully, and 21 is a full class, so that's a nice, neat teacher. There are several ways that this could be split up. You could have teachers 4 and 5 each have one of those 2 remote learning pods, and they would have their A pod come into class, and their B pod would be live when it was the week where B pod would come in instead of coming in. So it would be 50%. One of their 2 pods would be the remote, and that could be spread between teachers 4 and 5 instead of having both pods for teacher 5 be remote. So there are different ways to mix and match, but this kind of gives you an idea of how we would cluster them and make it certainly manageable for teachers, in that it would be a full pod that would be remote as, you know, the numbers work. So then we move into middle school, and you're basically applying that same scenario to the team level instead of the individual classroom teacher level, because at the middle school level, classes of students amongst their content teachers do still travel between, as a cohort between classrooms. And if you recall from our model, it would actually be the classroom teachers traveling to the students to eliminate many of the transitions throughout the day. But here's a situation, grade 8 at one of the 2 schools has 37 remote learning academy students. So I'm looking up here in this box for the information. Again, this is just at one school at one grade level. And this particular school has 2 teams of 2 4-person teams. So there's a teacher who teaches math, a teacher who teaches science, social studies, and ELA. And then the students travel to those different teachers for the various subjects. So in this case, if you look at team 1, which is in blue, section 1, that is a class of 22. And they're split into 2 pods. And 9 of those students are in Pod A, and they happen to be kind of the traditional hybrid. So they would show up when Pod A comes to school for a week. And Pod B would be 13 students who are remote learning academy students. And so the total that teacher has in that class is 22, or those teachers, I should say, have is 22. But when Pod B comes in person, instead, those teachers, when it's time for that class to come to them, don't have students showing up at their doorstep in their classrooms. Instead, they're logging on and teaching live with those Pod B students when that particular section comes to them. And then that's 13 of the 37. So you could apply that same model to team 2. So this is just showing a way that you can spread out those 37 students, but do it in a way that it equals a pod, so that teachers would just simply be logging on with the students instead of welcoming them when it's their week to come in. So it's a little bit more clean cut. Again, the numbers might vary a little bit. If numbers don't equal a full pod, we'll have to look at how to best service those students. But as a general framework to start with, this is the plan that we're proposing. And then we'll have to look at numbers. And another survey will be coming out once plans are approved, just to get a more solid understanding of what each family is selecting to do. So then we're going to move on to high school, where it's much more complicated, because students who are in a particular class that you could say, well, half of that class then would be remote learning students and the other half wouldn't, just like this. at the middle school and elementary school, that would be great for block A, for example. But because every child's schedule is completely unique and not like another child's schedule, then those remote learning academy students disperse everywhere else throughout the building. So you can't just track them and keep them together the way you can in the cohort model at the middle and the elementary level. So we are proposing a shift at the academy level. So what we're thinking at this point at the academy is our kind of main go-to model to start with is that students who select the remote learning academy will participate in their scheduled classes via a video collaboration system. So in this case, the school district would look to invest in the proper technology to allow students to participate in the classes that are happening live with their peers who are in fact in school in those classes. So going down to bullet 2, the RLA, Remote Learning Academy students, will attend the classes that they were assigned in their schedule, and different levels would be able to be accommodated. And again, they'd be participating with their in-person hybrid peers remotely. The reason why we shifted in this direction was a lot of logistics, but also trying to prioritize having Westford Academy teachers teach the courses that the students select. We, as I mentioned on Wednesday, we do have a partnership. DESE at the state level has partnered with different organizations to allow for us to have students who are choosing this option to sign up for a TECA online academy, for example, but that'd still be under the Westford Public Schools kind of enrollment umbrella. Other options like that, and that is certainly an option, and we may have to rely on that to help augment our plan, but it does send those students on a different track than their peers. So the way that we're doing this, the experience is really equitable. The students who are doing the Remote Learning Academy in this way have the same experience as their hybrid peers. And as a result, it provides more flexibility to move between models. And so one example is if we have students participating through one of these video collaboration systems that are set up that are real time when a teacher has the rest of the class in her geometry class, for example, if there were a situation where the COVID numbers spike, the school system does have to shift to remote, the students who are participating just simply become remote like the students who were hybrid, and nobody has really skipped a beat. So in terms of the ability to go back and forth between models with their peers who are participating in a different way, the hybrid way, it provides the flexibility to do that. Whereas if the district went fully remote and we had students who had signed up and we used the TECA Online Academy, then the district shuts down, goes remote, and we aren't able to merge those back together because the TECA Online Academy would have to continue down its course in order for students to receive the course credit. Now, there may be some cases where a course that a student has been assigned for one reason or another can't be set up in this way where there's a video collaboration system. And those are more one-offs where we'd work with the family and take a look at some of the other virtual school platforms to help fill the schedule. But again, going back to this main model, it would really be having students participate in a way that keeps them right in line with their hybrid peers. So that's all I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody as we move it back to you, Gloria.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that new information. Thank you for all of the questions you've answered over the course of the last week. Thank you to Chris and Lori, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you to the Teaching and Learning Committee. I was on along with Alicia Mallon, we were on a 2-hour call this morning, and we really got to hear the recap of the entire journey that the Teaching and Learning Committee has been on and how they have gotten to this point. And it was extremely helpful for me to see that. I hope that everyone knows that occasionally that it is the role of school committee to voice the concerns we are hearing from the community and to vet the models and the proposals that are being put before us. But absolutely, any comments or questions we've asked, we never intend any disrespect or disregard for our educators and what they're bringing to us. It's just really sometimes our role to ask questions and to push so that we better understand what are the pros and cons of these different options and what are the trade-offs. And I really appreciate everyone's patience and professionalism in responding to all of our inquiries. It was really helpful to hear from educators at all level on that teaching and learning subcommittee about how they had, over a long period of time, had wrestled with these various options. I found it very helpful. So thank you for all the presentations tonight and for everyone's help to bring the committee and also hopefully the community along with understanding where these proposals came from. And Carrie, thank you for the visuals. Wow, sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I feel like I do have a better understanding of how the Remote Learning Academy is designed. I know there's still problems to solve and framework to fill in, but wow, a visual does help. So thank you. We all learn in different ways, and that was super helpful to me. Courtney, thank you for sharing all of that additional information about how our highest needs learners would be served in this context. That is immensely reassuring, and I appreciate you sharing all that tonight. So with all of those thank yous in mind, I feel that I need to throw it to the committee and see if you have questions for any of our presenters tonight on new information you've learned this week or questions that you have. I think it will be helpful if we can try. I know sometimes when we make comments, and I probably just did it myself in issuing a lot of those thank yous, of addressing a myriad of topics at once. But maybe if there's a topic of concern from a committee member, maybe we can stick to one topic and address all of the remote learning questions at once. And then if there are K2 issues, address all of those at once, or health and safety issues. So if we can kind of chunk the discussion, I think it will help streamline our discussion and deliberation, and also make it easier for the administrators to respond to our concerns and questions, and hopefully will make more sense for the public at home as well. So does anyone have a topic that they want to start with?
Remote Learning Academy.
Okay, Chris, start with Remote Learning Academy.
Okay.
We ended on that. We'll start there and maybe work our way backwards through our presenters.
And I choose that because I think that's of a lot of interest to a lot of people who we've heard from, and it was sort of the last piece, I think, of the puzzle in a lot of ways that we're getting tonight, which is so great. Just first of all, appreciation for the thought that went into explaining what happens at elementary and middle school, but also really that flexibility at the high school, which I think was a major concern. I know you know that was a concern of mine. How do we do that? How do we make sure WPS teachers and WA teachers are teaching our Remote Learning Academy students? And I think we have the start of a plan that can offer that. And I think that's going to be a huge relief to a lot of families and a lot of students. So thank you for that. Carrie, you mentioned, there are maybe one-off cases where that remote curriculum won't be accessible for a given class. Do you have examples that come to mind that you would want to give? Because I guess in my head, I wasn't clear what that would look like or when that would happen.
Sure. I'm thinking of kind of an AP calculus course where that teacher, and this is totally hypothetical, that teacher has to take some sort of leave and we aren't able to offer it. Now that would also impact the hybrid students as well. So it's something that we would have to look at for those students, but how could we, during this time, the reality of hiring new staff that are high quality may be more challenging. So in that case, we might have to say, well, our AP Calc courses would have to be through TECA or something similar to TECA. And so in the cases that come to mind, it would be for the unique situations that would impact both hybrid and remote learning academy. And again, that's kind of like any other year, but I do think, like I said, hiring will be even more challenging, as well as the likelihood of some staff having to take a leave is now greater because of COVID and childcare, and there are other variables other than the normal leaves that we typically see.
Okay, thanks for that. I think there are a lot of questions that will get answered later about the Remote Learning Academy, you know, especially around technology, how that gets implemented, how professional development, but I don't think I have any further questions. I think I realize that those are things that are coming down the line. So I'm all set for now on that. Thanks.
And just to build on that a little bit, we have started the procurement process for these different platforms that we could use for this. And Julie Bedreau is a wealth of knowledge and has experience, or has colleagues who have experience in so many of these different variations of the video devices. And so we'll hopefully get that in as quickly as possible. There is potential that we would be up against a delay because all school districts are ordering the same stuff at this point in time. And we're just hoping to move as quickly as possible with that. And the first 2 weeks of professional development for teachers, it's why we're bumping out, per the commissioner, the start time to September 15th or so. That is to allow us to prepare teachers, staff, for these types of changes. And so there would be very targeted support for teachers around this exact thing, because it is an art, teaching remotely, and teaching fully remote like this versus teaching to a live class with remote learners as well is a different type of thing. And we are certainly committed to making sure that the teachers get the support they need in this new area of teaching.
Other questions on remote? Avery?
It's sort of piggybacking on Chris's, what kind of classes might be forced to do online. Will the families be notified ahead of time whether their class is in danger of not having a Westford Academy teacher versus having to go online? And I mean, I know sometimes it'll be a leave issue, but just how much time do we think we'll be able to notify these families that their AP whatever class may not be able to be taught by Westford Academy?
We will certainly, once we get the list of people who are signing up for this, we're going to look individually at every child's schedule. And at that point, we will be able to identify any red flags based on the staffing information that Human Resources has on those who are looking to take leaves, and we'll communicate individually with each of those families who may not be able to participate in a Westford Public Schools remote version of a course, or even a in-person hybrid version of a course if it's a whole course that we're having concerns about.
And TECA is just one of the platforms you're looking at. The other, I know that there was a lot of talk about this Florida school and why are we doing that and why aren't we using our own teachers? So just to be clear, it's one of the options in those one-off situations.
Yes, TECA is one of the two, Greenfield is the other, partners with DESE where students would sign up, and that comes with an instructor, and they're just doing an online virtual school. And while, we would be overseeing things like absences, things of that nature, they would be delivering the instruction. The Florida Virtual School
Yes.
is something more. They offer platforms and content, which is a different version of online, where we would have one of our teachers have this ready-made program to deliver, but they would be the ones actually teaching it. So the Florida Virtual School, which is actually more appropriate for the elementary level, and I don't see us having to use them, but that would be involving our staff member. It's just the materials that would give to the staff member.
Alicia, and then Sean, then Ming Chen.
So I'm glad to see that Remote Learning Academy is being fleshed out a little bit more. I think that's a huge concern for a lot of parents. But I actually want to back up even further. And I know that these things have been said multiple times, and I'm sorry that you have to repeat, but there's an old PTO joke that the reason we send home so many flyers is because it takes 6 times for anyone to really register something. The remote learning option, correct me if I'm wrong, is available to any family who chooses it, correct?
That's correct. It is not just for students who have medical documentation. It's for any parent who, based on COVID and looking at the hybrid model, would prefer their child work from home or remotely.
Okay. Sorry about the audio problem. The second part of my question is, and this goes to staff safety concerns. I understand that the hybrid is the compromise between all remote and all in person, and that we are still addressing a lot of staff safety concerns. However, it is also my understanding that staff can choose to be remote and that there will be a process for that. Can you speak to that?
That's something that we are working with the WEA on, in terms of how we would be selecting which teachers. In that, I think, grade 2 example, there was one whole teacher who was doing the live remote for both pods A and B for the Remote Learning Academy. How that selection process takes place is something that we want to collaborate with the union on, and has not yet been determined. It's not necessarily accurate to say that, or to assume that teachers can just choose if they want to be fully remote or not. We are developing a model and looking at, what opportunities do we have for teachers who are fully remote. And if there are those opportunities, what are the parameters around that particular position? Then who do we choose for that? So it's not just kind of an open-ended choice for staff, but would certainly prefer to put staff in those remote models who are excited about it and willing and feel as though they're able to do it, and or it may be helping them stay connected with the district because of some other reasons, medically or other.
Who's up next, Sean?
Yeah, Carrie, have we articulated, I know we've talked about this, that if you start at the remote model, if you're a family who starts at the remote model, that you won't just be able to immediately switch back to whatever in-person model that we have, assuming that we do. So it strikes me that the model that you just presented, particularly at the high school level, I mean, it will be really difficult to do so. Are we talking, if there's a family who wanted to transition from that, are we talking like end of the semester,
We are asking for a semester-long commitment from those who choose Remote Learning Academy, just so that we can properly plan for any sort of switchover. Would survey those remote learning families in advance to say, are you going to stick with this for the rest of the year? Maybe by then, everybody's remote and it's a moot point. We're not sure. So we are asking for that. However, I will say, particularly at the academy, it's much easier to transition in and out because the teacher is teaching live, and let's pretend there are 5 students in their class who have chosen Remote Learning Academy, but they're on their roster. Well, they're placed in a pod, and there are seats for that pod. So those students, in theory, could come in anytime and not skip a beat because they're in that pod anyway, just hearing remotely and participating remotely. So it actually lends itself nicely to any sort of fluid situation. We want to avoid that, but if it has to, there's much less of a hiccup there. One other benefit to that model that I didn't mention that I'd like to is if there was on the flip side at the academy, if there were a high school student whose sibling gets COVID-19, that hybrid in-person student now has to quarantine for 14 days and could just hop on with their peers who have already been hopped on because they chose the Remote Learning Academy, and that might be an opportunity to help support that student who can't show up, is still feeling fine, but can't show up because he or she is quarantining. So it's another little kind of bonus that we felt, that model brought.
Thanks.
Ming Chen.
So in a remote learning academy, how will be like engineering and the lab be handled? And then how about PE? How about orchestral band if they participate in those activities?
Yeah, so all of those activities are going to be modified anyway. With PE, with band, with chorus, students aren't going to be fully singing out loud like they normally would be. So we've got to go course by course, Ming-Jen, now that we've got the model. However, we do believe that this is conducive to that. So the PE activities that our PE teachers are going to be doing and teaching the students are going to be very low impact. Students aren't going to be, running and clustering and diving for a particular supply like a basketball. So we do think that others would be able to participate nicely. And I do think it lends itself in many ways well to the music department too.
And Carrie, that
engineering and the lab.
I'm sorry?
How about engineering and the lab, which they cannot do at home?
So, and those are types of courses, and you bring up a good point. And like I said, the guidance counselors, along with the administration, are going to go through each course. And maybe that's an example of something that would be less feasible in this model, in which case would have to find another way, a way to be creative and get those students what they need. Or it may be a phone call, with the student and the family to say, might this be, might there be another course that you are interested in, would want to take? And if not, then we can continue working with that family. But that's actually a point that if there's some sort of course that doesn't lend itself to that type of remote learning, that's an example of one we may have to take a look at. So we'll have to go through each of the courses that are offered and that are taking place just to check off, does this work or does it not?
So if some of the courses cannot be done remotely, does it affect the high school kid if they are going to graduate? If they really need that course?
We'd have to look at what that is. What I can fairly confidently say to you tonight is choosing the Remote Learning Academy should not impact your graduation status. Absolutely not. So we would work with those students. We are not going to penalize any student or family for needing, for whatever the reason is, to choose the remote learning.
Carrie, I think it's important to remember with those examples, with engineering and with the science labs and with PE, back to your point, which is they're going to look different in person. So I know the question was whether or not those would be able to be done remotely. the teachers are already been thinking about how are they going to rethink the learning objectives and the way in which they would have done things anyway at all grade levels, because the ability to do the hands-on work and many of the labs, the students collaborating and working together in lab spaces, that's all compromised with the physical distancing that we need. So much of that is going to look different. The only other thing I was just going to mention is that PE might be the best example, where in the remote learning, the teacher would be able to assign the students work, but they might not be able to just watch the class taking place in the same way they would, because, for example, if the PE teacher takes the class outside, they're not going to necessarily be able to bring any of that equipment with them. So that might be an example where a course like that, the students in the remote learning academy might need to be doing a very, very different activity than the kids who are in school, just by the nature of the space. And again, the idea being is that we have all of these, that we have the 10 days where all of the adults are able to come together, or not to come together necessarily, but to be able to collaborate as well, so that we can have all of these opportunities to talk about how classes are going to have to look different.
So for all those kids with remote PE, will they receive lighter grades?
They certainly could. I mean, they certainly, I think it's a different, yes. It would still be different than the spring, right? In the spring, at least at the middle school level, I know we're talking more about the academy with the remote learning, but the PE still became more of, there were still options for students to be doing, and the goal was just to keep kids active at that moment in time. They would still be following specific learning objectives, but the PE teachers would be much better to be able to think in terms of, they might have a completely different type of course or units that they develop specifically for the remote learning students.
So I know we're not going to be able to catch all of these, but there were some specific remote learning questions on the Airtable. And I think one of them you actually already addressed, Carrie, that so just to clarify, a hybrid student who's typically in the building during their APOD day, if they need to be on quarantine for some reason, or if they have a mild illness, and they need to be out of school because they're potentially symptomatic, they've got a small cold, a sore throat, it's a reason that we're encouraging them to stay home now for safety reasons. But if they feel up to participating, that student could log on and participate in their class remotely and stay engaged with their class, just as if the remote learning students were. A hybrid student has that advantage as well, right?
That's right.
And the other question was about the middle school level. I know we addressed kind of how middle schoolers might get a remote learning academy student might get incorporated into a team. How would that work with world languages at the middle school level? Because I know those are handled a little differently.
Yeah, that is an excellent question, because that is a concern about both with world languages and then with the integrated arts. And so even just this morning, we were talking about that what we're talking about as the model for the academy might work for those classes specifically, in helping students to stay connected and being able to still participate in that. It also might be an example where they might not be able to do everything. So we would need to look at those numbers more closely to see if that's a possibility. But that is one of the things that we just are concerned about, is that some classes it might not be possible for a student to access some of the integrated arts specifically based on the numbers, if in our model, the way that we've set up the pods differently. So that's something that we'll have to keep looking at. And as soon as we have more answers, or at least more confidence in an answer for that, we would share that.
I really appreciate all this information. I know we have received such a range of feedback from the community on so many issues during this time. But if there is one common thread that we have heard over the last week, it is please, please, please maximize the ability of remote learning students to connect with Westford teachers. The community is united in that they want Westford students to receive as much Westford connection and Westford education as they can, and that really does speak to the community's confidence and connection with our schools and with our teachers. So that has been a very common theme. Are there any other questions or comments on remote learning? Or, I mean, and I know we could do this all night, but are we ready to hop to another topic? So working backwards in our presentations, questions for Courtney on special educations and high needs learners. Alicia.
So I hope my audio holds up for this. If it doesn't, I've actually typed something to a couple of presenters to hopefully get it through. Courtney, you said the decisions on services wouldn't be made until the school year starts. Do you mean when staff reports, or do you mean the 2 weeks later when the students report?
So we will need to work out how we're going to use those staff days. Those 10 days that have been given to us from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education are for professional development. So we are defining how those days would look. Right now, my hope is that it would be a combination of the PD that will be necessary in order to pull off this different methodology of teaching and make sure that everybody feels comfortable with it, but also to make sure that we are giving colleagues time to collaborate with one another. And if that is the case, then I would recommend that we use that time wisely in looking at the caseloads and scheduling students so that we are ready to provide services on day one of students returning to school.
So my other concern there is that I'm hearing from a lot of parents that it's sort of a chicken and an egg. They're waiting to see what the remote model looks like. They're waiting to see what the in-person model looks like and they're waiting to see what their services look like before they decide in-person or remote. And I understand that's sort of the opposite of what you're saying. It's sort of a framework that you have to hang special education off of. Whereas there are parents who are saying, no, I want to know what the framework looks like before I decide. So I think I don't have an answer for that, but I think those two things are going to be in direct conflict with each other.
Well, I think that the framework of what services will look like is already outlined on the IEP. So if a family member knows that the student receives speech and language services twice a week, then those services will be delivered. If they know that if they are recommended for a small group English language arts class or a math class, those services will be delivered. Exactly how they'll be scheduled you will have to wait for that decision once the liaisons are able to schedule themselves accordingly. And regardless of what they choose, whether it's hybrid or remote, like I said, it's going to be a combination of those services, synchronous and asynchronous instruction. For remote, there might also be some times that if a parent feels comfortable, even if they've already said, hey, I'm going to be remote, could they come in for their evaluation schedule? Could they come in because the speech language pathologist is trying to 100% very clearly hear the articulation of a specific sound? So we're going to have to get creative in being able to figure out a baseline of where our students are at this time and how to move forward when developing goals and objectives. The other piece of what do I choose? I guess from our perspective, the hope is that parents are choosing based on the health and safety needs of their own individual situations and not necessarily what my model would look like. So I guess if I was saying that my child would be fully remote, it would be because I know I don't want him entering that school, that I'm not comfortable with that. So therefore, that decision really doesn't matter about his special education services. It would be more around the health and safety. And then from there, we will build in the special education supports. But again, the Department of Ed, their directive, unless they change it, and every few weeks when we're on the call, we're waiting to hear further information. In fact, one of the pieces that we were told we would hear in July, and I know that some parents are anxious to hear about, is what about my compensatory services? And compensatory services are usually coined as the district has not been able to fulfill their services, and so therefore does the student require compensatory services to make them whole. In this case, we were shut down, and so the Department of Ed started coining those compensatory services as additional services. So where are we in terms of possible regression for any one of those skills? None of those things can be determined until a student is in front of us and that we're able to take some baseline information. And so possibly the department would be changing their thought process on what compensatory services / additional services would look like. But in the past, it's always been, has the student regressed to a substantial amount in comparison to his or her peers? And then that would trigger the need for what would be the compensatory services required to make them whole. It certainly does not mean you've missed 5 sessions of PT, therefore you owe me 5 sessions of PT. That has always been the guidance that has been issued in the past from the department. Whether there's a different formula that's coming up, we will find out. But Russell Johnson said that would be part of our next meeting that would be taking place either next week or the following week. And certainly does make it difficult for us to plan for services and to answer questions that many of the anxious parents are waiting to hear when the can keeps getting kicked down the road from the Department of Education. Also makes it very challenging for us to plan financially because, as you can imagine, compensatory services isn't something that we are readily able to deploy. The people that we do have on staff are the ones that are there to meet the needs that we already know we have to meet on a given day in an IEP. So there are many things that work against us throughout this entire pandemic, and we'll continue to do our very best.
There were a couple of special education specific questions from Airtable, although really, I think, Courtney, your presentation was pretty comprehensive and answered a number of them. This one is, what does Remote Learning Academy look like for students who are pulled out of core subjects with special education staff? Will there be a group of special education teachers assigned to the Remote Learning Academy?
So I think in order to answer that question, we would go back to the example that Kerry gave, in that those remote students would be assigned to a pod, A pod or B pod. If the student happens to have all pullout services for their English language arts instruction, 5 times 45, let's say, at the elementary level, then that special education teacher would be responsible for delivering those services on that alternating A week, B week. On their B weeks, on their weeks that they're not in school, they would be receiving still instruction, but it wouldn't be the in-person services. Now, the only exception to that, Gloria, would be if that ELA services is also coupled with many other services that would qualify that individual student as saying, hey, 75% of my services are outside of the mainstream. And so then we would be making a different decision for that particular student.
Many complexities ahead. Another special education question is from one of our educators. Will remote IEP meetings and evaluations be conducted during the afternoon? I'm very concerned about maximizing my in-person time with my students as their special education teacher.
And so I think this question is a great question because it really showcases where teachers want to be. Okay, so we're all teachers because we want to be educating our students and interacting with our students. And bumped into a special educator this summer up in Maine, and her comments were, "I just hope I have the opportunity to establish that relationship with students before something may or may not happen and we end up in remote land." So I think that that's a great question. Unfortunately, we have 800 team meetings to squeeze in. Talk about an impossible task. And we're not going to be able to get them all in by October 15th. That would be ridiculous. There would be no instruction that would be happening because we would be all hands on deck in IEP meetings. So we will once again be taking a look at the meetings that need to occur, starting with the ones that we missed in the spring, triaging those and doing the very best that we can. And because by law, these meetings require both special education participation as well as the general education teachers. So when we can schedule them for the afternoon, we certainly will be taking advantage of that. But there will be, I think that there would have to be some that will be occurring in the morning hours as well. But great question, and definitely shows where the heart of our teachers are.
There was also another parent question about how Westford Public Schools is going to communicate with families to involve families in that scheduling of services. As you've indicated, you've got 800 students and haven't seen them in person in some time, and the 2 weeks PD. And so I think the question from the parent is really, when can they expect that communication, and when will that process start?
So I'm thinking the most efficient way to do that, and again, this is information that I had just received on Thursday, haven't had the full opportunity to digest it with the leadership team or understand exactly how our professional development days will be defined and what we will not be allowed to do as far as activities. But I'd like to see some initial outreach during that time in the form of an email, just connecting with families, asking them for what their priorities are, what worked, what didn't work in the spring, and what their concerns are before we can begin to build what that schedule will look like. The schedule will be built from the teachers because that's where the puzzle piece has to begin. Hopefully parents will be satisfied with what's being presented, and in cases where they are not, we will work with those families to tweak as appropriate. To give an example, a couple times it happened this summer that we did roll out a schedule for a particular student. 1 or 2 sessions in, we received some feedback from a family member. We were able to make adjustments, and then the rest of the summer school services seemed to go much smoother. So where we can certainly partner, we will. Will we be able to accommodate all 800 requests across 5 different methodologies of delivery of instruction? No. And also with the reminder of school ends at a certain time. And some of the requests that we did receive in the spring was, well, we're available at 6:30 p.m. Does that work for you? And that's probably not going to be the case.
Thank you, Courtney. Any other questions on special education or working our way back? Questions for Chris and Lori on their presentation regarding the the choice of a hybrid model and kind of how the teaching and learning group got to this selection. Ming Chen.
So I'm curious about the calculation, saying that full day is only giving us 15 minutes a day. Because based on the half-day schedule, the kids now released at 11, and then from 11 to 2 o'clock, that's like 3 hours. So how come we only get 15 minutes more from the 3 hours if they stay at school?
So the first part is that it's not just for those days, right? So we looked at the overall amount of time when you look at the two different models in comparison to each other. And there is about an hour to an hour and a half on average that there's more time that would actually be in school, but that then also includes additional transitions and additional need for breaks. So once you add all of those components in, plus all of the time that it's going to take revolving around transitioning in and out of lunches for every single group, we were estimating that we'd be getting about 15 to 30 minutes of actual instructional time. So that's where that came from.
It was over the course of 2 weeks, Ming-Jen, because of our proposed hybrid model. In order for a student to cycle through, it was over a 2-week period, right? Their week in and then their week fully remote. And so week schedule of the student experience and looked at the live times, whether it be in person or remote, it's the direct instruction, and then compared that to 2 weeks of the AARBB model. And it was, as Chris said, anywhere, depending on the level, from 1 to 2 hours per week difference of actual direct instruction. And so then we took that and divided by 5 to make a day. But you know, the days off would be very different than the days on. So that's why it's an average over the course of 2 weeks of anywhere from 15. And I don't think it's an actual full half hour at any of the levels, but 15 to 20 or 25 minutes per day on average.
All right. So I do appreciate that the explanation and then the presentation today again. It has a little bit more details than 2 weeks ago, because July 27th, I already saw the presentation about the half-day hybrid. So today it has the community partnership and then the instruction time, all of stuff, filling in a little bit more details. So since the July 27th school committee meeting, most of the questions we got actually one of the biggest concern coming back from the parents is that the half-day model doesn't work for a lot of families. So so I'm a little bit like disappointed that we made like almost no change based on a lot of the parents' feedback. I appreciate that we're trying to actually do something with a community partnership, but we are just shifting something which our school system should be doing to like other places in town. And then the on week and the off week, that's really like a schedule breaker for a lot of families because there is no consistency. I think I don't have to reiterate that again. And then I know that we talk about like lunch is the biggest issue. So lunch now is the biggest issue for this district, that we cannot actually do the AABB hybrid. That's a little bit like hard to believe because we have, I think many of you guys already mentioned like daycare centers, all the stuff, and the kids are having lunch in the daycare centers, in Case Lake, in other daycare centers. So those are kids actually are much like smaller, a lot of kids than our kids from like K to 12. So I just, how come like we cannot actually have lunch for like middle school or high school kids, which
So let me just say, I will say respectfully that on the 27th, when we presented this, I said during that presentation that lunch was a major factor that we were considering that brought us to this. So we actually did talk about that. And I understand the concerns that the parents have had and the response that people had to that presentation. And so we did go back and we looked at it more in depthly, and we did examine other models. And so we have been taking all of that feedback and continuing to look at what we're looking for these proposed models. And we're still coming back to what we believe our proposed model is the best thing for us to be doing. It's the most educationally sound, and the biggest point being that the teachers have direct contact with their students on a daily basis in this model, that it doesn't happen in the AARBB model. And so there's more time in which students would not be connecting with teachers over the course of that period. So the logistics of the lunch, it's difficult to compare it to daycares because the numbers just aren't the same. So, for example, with 50% of a grade at Stony Brook, that's 100 kids. So I'm still looking at trying to organize lunches for 100 students, and we don't have a facility that would allow us to do that. So we'd have to break the lunches up into multiple time periods again, which then increases or decreases the class time that people are going to have, and interrupts that in different ways. So I mean, that's why logistically it's just it's a much bigger challenge than I think we're seeing with daycares and camps that are staying outside and don't necessarily have the same expectations and or the same stringent regulations that we're going to have in terms of the lunches that we have in the schools. And so I don't know if that helps or not, but those are the things that we were looking at.
I think
Yeah,
also
so,
hundreds of students, at the same time, I think that the size is different, but the reality is there are other school districts who are doing it and have worked out lunch. I think the most sort of traditional model that we're seeing, and it's funny even calling anything traditional at this point, but is that AARBB. But what we also said was, while lunch is such a logistical hurdle, it's really, when we thought about the educational value, the student well-being, the health and safety concerns, the lemon wouldn't even be worth the squeeze, so to speak, because it wouldn't be gaining students much more. Convenience for parents, yes, and that kept coming back in our conversation, and we had that kind of guilt along the way of, but what about this? And for some families, that's going to be very difficult. But we kept going back to our charge with safety being most paramount, and then the educational piece and anything we can do, as the superintendent is doing with the partnerships, which is clunky. It's an extra step for busing to go to different organizations. It's not what people are used to, and it's just part of the nature of the pandemic.
Yeah, the health and safety, as we've talked previously tonight, was a major issue with lunch. You're talking a larger number of students, relatively larger, certainly unmasked, and we certainly didn't think it was worth that risk, knowing that the governor has recently now provided an executive order to reducing the number of people down from, I believe it's 100 to 50 in terms of maximum number that can aggregate together. So it's not only the length of the lunch periods and the interruption of general instruction, but it's absolutely, as everyone has said, that health and safety issue with children who are unmasked, even if they're 6 feet apart, there's coughing, sneezing, etc. We just didn't think it was worth taking the chance for the students and for the staff.
Yeah, I just want to clarify also that we definitely aren't saying that lunch is not possible. It's not that we can't make lunch happen. It's that the committee felt that it wasn't our safest option.
But then we are actually shipping all those kids to Round Bush and then kids leave to have lunch. So how does that like be safer?
Well, I wouldn't say that we're sending all of them, right? I realize that there are parents who are going to need that, but I think there are also a lot of parents who aren't. And while I completely empathize with the people who need this, I really, really do, from the bottom of my heart, there is also another large cohort of people who do appreciate the focus on safety. And we have heard from those families as well.
Avery?
So I just want to talk about the health and safety part of it. And I feel that the subcommittee, the TNL group, did have to weigh the health and safety and the educational validity of these plans. And it's not an easy way out. And I want to make sure that we keep talking about the students, but let's not forget, we have a huge staff that we also need to protect. And we need to make sure that they are in the safest locations for them while optimizing the educational experience for the students. So I feel that the committee really weighed all of that out to the best of their abilities in keeping the students safe, the staff safe, and getting the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak, in what we can offer right now, given the COVID restrictions. I just don't want to forget about our staff and that they are too a factor in our plan.
John?
Yeah, Carrie or Dr. Chu, has there been a discussion about transitions and how that will look? Like, are we talking about each pod getting up and moving, or are we going to try to have the teachers move from classroom to classroom? Like how, maybe I'm putting it before the horse, but down the road.
So yes, at the middle school level and at the elementary school level, more at the middle school level, the teachers are going to move. So the pods would not be moving. So the student would be in an advisory, that they would be in a classroom that they would stay in, and then the teachers would be moving to those classrooms, with the exception of if there was a small group instruction piece where some students might actually leave that classroom to then meet with a teacher in a different space. Those would be the exceptions to that part. But then the teachers would be moving to each classroom. And one of the things we talked about, for example, we'll just say PE, right? So the phys ed teacher would go to the classroom and use the classroom space to deliver the very beginning of the lesson. And then for all of the weather that we can hopefully count on, the phys ed teacher would then take the students outside, and then be using the outside area as much as possible. If then weather's not cooperating, then the phys ed teacher would be able to then take the group to the gym. But that's one of the things we talked about, as opposed to right now. That's one of the beauties of middle school, is that the students get this freedom to transition from class to class on their own, and to go from one class, and we're just not going to have that. So the teachers would need to then make a choice. If they're taking, any teacher could do it, take a class outside for whatever reason, whatever the learning objective might be, if it works for that. But the teachers would be making that decision. The kids would be staying in a very specific room, which then makes that transition, like we're talking about for the different lunches, problematic. Of then we're already talking about a staggered entry and a staggered dismissal, but we're also trying to minimize the number of kids that are in a hallway at any given time. So classes would also then have to move at separate times in order to do that. At the academy, they are talking about the students would be moving to different classes, but that's one of the reasons why they've also tried to minimize the number of classes that meet during a day, and to maximize that period, so that then there are fewer transitions for those students. And they're still talking in terms of, strategically how they can even have different classes move at different times, just again to decrease the number of people who are moving at the same time.
Right.
And that certainly presents an issue, right? I mean, if we're seriously looking at full day hybrid, right? I guess that's what we're calling it now. You could theoretically have one cohort of children in the same room for literally the whole day, right? Including lunch.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's exactly what could happen, which is the other part when we talked about decreasing their time in that space. I mean, it's difficult for some people to understand because they're just thinking, okay, well, the kids are in rows. What's the big deal? I grew up and I was in rows. You know, that's not what we're talking about, though. We're still talking about the students losing all autonomy to decide when they're going to get up from their desk, to make decisions, to when they're going to be able to turn and talk with someone who's now 6 feet away from them. And yeah, the students will have an assigned desk, and that'll be their spot that they sit in all day long. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I hear more than anything from parents when they're coming to the middle school is the concern that we don't have a recess, right? So they have a 5-minute time period where they could go outside and look at the sun. And, you know, we joke about they go outside and go, ah, and then they go back inside. But the reason why that hasn't been a problem is because there's so much movement and activity in all of the classes, right? Every single teacher breaks up every single class into different activities, and the kids are moving around. The kids are working in small groups. The kids are collaborating. The rooms have all been set up that way. I mean, it is not an exaggeration to say that our students have never entered the environments that we're talking about. Right, our students, I would even say, at first I was saying the majority, but now I would just say our students K to 12, they still haven't, and they haven't had this type of experience. And so that's one of those concerns that we looked at. And so that's another reason why we were looking at the hybrid, because we were saying, okay, if they have 3 classes in the morning, and that's something that we can really focus on, and then allow them to then access a different environment in the afternoon and not have all of that rigid, just it's the rigidity of those expectations to get to get a break from that. I mean, we've talked about the masks, right? And I do think there are different people who respond differently to the masks. I just think the lack of movement alone is going to be a challenge for most of our students. It might not be a challenge for, you know, our older teenagers who sometimes we have to prod to get them to move a little bit more, you know, but I would say definitely the majority of our students, getting them, expecting them to remain still, and in a 2x3, that's what the size of these desks are, right? So it's basically 2 feet by 3 feet. That's kind of the space that they're going to have as their own, because we're trying to keep them out of everybody else's space.
Yeah, great points, Chris. You know, we're forcing them, and all other school systems are, into a very unnatural environment and level of activity in the schools. And it's, you know, certainly one of the reasons why the shorter day plays out far, far better for students than the long protracted day.
So I'm trying to monitor questions from online, and as I've said, I apologize, there's no way we're going to be able to get to all of them, but I'm trying to pick out ones that either ask something that I feel like it's new that we haven't talked about, or are maybe just representative of a ton of other concerns. And this parent's question is that the plan schedules state that the in-school pod in the afternoon, for elementary level at least, may vary from synchronous with pod B or asynchronous depending on the teacher plan. So that pod A that's in school in the morning, if I understand the question correctly, when they go home, sometimes they might be logging on, or sometimes they might not, depending on the teacher plan. And she said, this seems to indicate that synchronous in the afternoon is not absolutely required. Some parents or childcare centers might bend over backwards for something that isn't required at all. Please clarify what remote synchronous learning will be in the afternoon for the in-school pod and how important it really is. Also, is this remote synchronous learning for the in-school pod in the afternoon part of the math for instructional time when compared to the full day?
No. So to summarize, so we always talk about pod A being the pod in school for the week and pod B being home. So just for common language, we're going to stick with that, but we know the following week it's pod B that's in. But for the sake of this, if we're looking at pod A as the group that's in for the week, they leave at the early dismissal time. Then there's asynchronous instruction that they go do in the afternoon to finish out the school day. And that's when the teachers have the opportunity to log in with the Pod B kids who have been home for the day. And we did say sometimes the teacher may want to mix and have a whole group, a whole class, something, lesson, meeting, whatever it may be, and those Pod A kids who are home, and I think the default is probably to do asynchronous work, would be logging on, and then in theory get a full day because they would have been in school all day, and then at home they log on live with their teacher who's teaching the Pod B students, but merging them for that particular lesson, activity, objective, whatever it may be. How important are those? Well, right now in the plan, they are important. We would certainly communicate that properly and with enough notice to families in the case that there's a planning concern. However, we do want people going into this, which is very different than March, of the mindset that the say for elementary is 9:05 to 3:10, or 8:30 to 2:30 for the 3 through 5. So they should plan to be school ready for those hours. And so in theory, after school, sometimes it might be independent work or even group work, but not teacher led. And sometimes it won't be. But if parents should plan that the students are school ready and actively unschooled during the hours. Where in March, we said, here's what we have to do. And if 9 o'clock at night works for you, that's fine, because we know everybody is running around crazy. And it's emergency remote learning, whereas this is more planned out, and we are asking people to carve out the school day. So all of that said, it is important. If there's some reason where a child, really is in a pickle and can't, then just communicate that with the teacher. But it is not accounted for that A group, A pod afternoon, we counted as asynchronous and therefore was not part of the math to calculate direct instruction.
Even though they very likely could be included, we really did want to offer that flexibility so that if a teacher wanted to bring the whole class together so that they could see all of their peers, hoping that at some point we all come back together, then that would be a great time for that. And again, the flexibility there is the key. They'll have those students they'll have a set of students with them in the morning. They can set expectations for what they would be doing at home. Maybe they would need to log right in when they get home, or maybe the teacher's going to start with that Pod B and then check back in with that Pod A. So we were really hoping to keep that as flexible as possible, so that just like when you're teaching in person, you're shifting along the way based on the student needs.
And we talked about that originally when we were first looking at this model. We talked about the afternoons being the entire group, both pods together, for everybody. And the teachers on the committee resoundingly provided the feedback immediately with their ideas, saying that it was so important for the B pod to have the small focus the same way that the A pod had in the morning, for the B pod to have that direct focus, and for the afternoon to be about them. So that's when we said, that is important. And so we should be looking at how we can organize it in that way, which is how we shifted to that idea that the B pod would be the primary live synchronous time in the afternoon, knowing then that a teacher could say, hey, depending on the grade level, it'd certainly be easier with older kids, but even with the younger kids, with notice to say, it'd be great if everybody could log in together because this one thing that they wanted to do specifically between those two classes works. But the other point is that teachers could also have an individual student who might have been struggling with something in the morning during the APOD session. The teacher could even say, if you want to, you can actually join us again this afternoon and hear the conversation again. I mean, so it's also not even just a whole group thing as much as it allows teachers the ability to still continue to individualize and meet the kids' needs, which I think is huge.
I
So
think
if I
it's
just,
important to underscore again that that's one of the points we made in the childcare meeting this afternoon, is that, and a differentiating factor from the spring is what you've all said, is the students have to be essentially instruction ready or school ready throughout that entire time frame. This is not get out of school at midday, go home or to a daycare center, have lunch, and then have a snack and play tag for the rest of the time. It's the we're expecting schoolwork to be accomplished.
And we believe that there's, health benefits for everybody to get back on more of a regular schedule, our students, our families, and of course our staff, because in the previous model, whether you were, it wasn't even really a model, but in the how we handled the spring, everybody, students, teachers, all of us, everybody was sort of working around the clock because there wasn't that start and end time. So we believe that this will also be a healthier model for everyone involved.
so I know I've got a couple of hands, but just to provide that follow-up to what you were just sharing, Bill. So in your conversations with potential community partners that may be helping us with this childcare issue, which remains a concern for many, are you receiving positive feedback from these community partners that they feel like they can provide that on task, instruction ready time that students can still access their learning in the childcare environment that might be outside our buildings, but still within school hours?
Well, please know that it was the initial conversation today, but I don't think between Avery and myself, I don't think we heard anything that precluded that from taking place. I think they all understood what we were looking for and seemed to indicate that they would be able to accommodate that. But keeping in mind, it was our initial voyage into that conversation.
One of the things. Sorry, Courtney.
It was a good conversation. It was definitely promising. Certainly, they're waiting to find out what the final model is going to look like. They have their own guidelines that they need to follow in terms of EEC guidelines for their own distancing. So some of the capacity issues, but there was already some decent amount of brainstorming within that initial conversation.
Yeah.
Another great thing that came up in our teaching and learning discussion as well was one of the parents who has been joining us for the last couple of meetings reminded us today, or let us know that she's part of a very large Facebook group here in Westford of almost 500 families that have already been communicating or starting to look at how they can be connecting with each other once we know what the cohorts are and where the students were being assigned to which cohorts, that they're prepared to then start looking at how they can be supporting each other for some of this time, which I think is another great way in which families are coming together. And we talked about our ability as a school to help try to share some of that information. So if there's a family out there that feels like they're on an island and they don't have any of this support, there might be ways that we can kind of connect them with other family groups and community groups in town as well, which I think is a very valuable resource.
One of the reasons why the geographic division of students within a particular school district will help with that particular issue.
Okay, I appreciate the collaborative spirit. Valerie, and then I'm sorry, Hannah, I think I keep missing your hand. So Valerie, and then Hannah, and then people please wave at me if I've missed any hands. It's getting late.
So just to follow on that conversation and to clarify, do any of those community partners have the infrastructure to offer something on that off week? Or are we just talking about extending that like lunch and afternoon and possibly after school care for the Pod A school week?
So that's where our conversation kind of stopped a little bit in not knowing exactly what the model was going to look like. But I think that they would be open to those solutions given staffing and their own constraints.
Yeah. We did make it clear, Valerie, that we needed to know what the model was with certainty before we went too much farther. And we do have another meeting scheduled for 1 o'clock next Monday to continue this.
Great, because I mean, I appreciate all the context and detail given tonight. You know, I don't want to rehash lunch, but one thing that I've heard from this plan is that ability for the teachers to see both pods every day. And I guess I just worry about the families who just, you know, the kids are not home for that off week. And then are they still having access problems to that afternoon login time, right? So, you know, we've kind of heard some comments from the community that the school focus should be education and not childcare, and to stop worrying about some of these things. But I don't think it's just working families. I think it's not just convenience. It's about accessibility and equity. And so if we're saying that this 9-day gap is acceptable because we're like logging in, I just want us to be aware that, you know, not all of those families will have kids, you know, just kind of home with someone, you know, waiting, like you said, instruction ready. And what does that look like for those kids? So, you know, the earlier conversation about safety nets and following up on the kids who are unengaged is, you know, kind of exactly where I hope that conversation keeps going, because I do still have that concern there. And I think that 9-day gap still, for me, exists as a concern for kindergarten. I have a 5-year-old, and I know that week might end up feeling like a vacation week, you know, Christmas break or something. And so working on that engagement on that home week is a concern for me. So I'd really still be interested in having a larger budget discussion about exploring other options for kindergarten. I'm worried about offering our kindergarten team less than full-time positions and having new teams created there. And I don't know what the solutions are, and I don't think we probably have solutions tonight, but I just want that. Maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but I just don't want to give up on that, on those youngest kids yet.
Respect those comments, certainly.
Where am I? Hannah. I'm sorry, lost track. Hannah. Keep waving at me, Hannah.
It's okay. I think the question was answered for the most part. I was just, I was under the impression that we were gonna have like scheduled Zoom meetings with our whole class in the afternoon, which I guess is not what the asynchronous model was. But if it's possible, I feel like at least on some days that might be a good idea, just because the class is going to be so divided that if we could like bring everyone together in the afternoons, that might be good to help people learn. My other question was, well, I guess it doesn't really matter now because of that, but that's all.
I think it was kind of left open, Hannah, that it does depend on the teacher and their choice, and there might certainly be times that the teacher does want to bring the whole class together. So it has have that option, and I think it really varies. It sounds like, if I'm hearing our educators correctly, that it would vary by age. That they might be less frequent to do that at the elementary level, but maybe, like you're indicating, it is something that would be more frequent to happen at the upper levels. I think it depends on the class and the particular subject and the teacher's needs.
One of the things that we've talked about that, and I know Principal Antonelli has talked about it as well too, is that this being the framework, again, we keep talking about, this being the framework that we have, and yes, it could be an option for different reasons, but there'll also be times when we might say, as the principals, we need to change the schedule today, in terms of we do that when in the real and when we're all in person, we might say that we're having an assembly today, so then we're shifting all of the classes. I don't want people to panic thinking that we're just going to change the schedules on them, because that's not why I said that. But the point being is that we could say, listen, we do want all of the classes to meet next Tuesday in the afternoon, A pod and B pod together, either for that point that you just mentioned, Hannah, or for other purposes. At the middle school level, even as we continue to look at the schedules and continue to look at where there are ways internally that we can even increase time, some of our teachers came up with the idea of even having our advisory time meet before the end of the day and have that be both groups together in the advisory, almost even as a transition from the morning A group, and then they both come together for advisory before dismissal, and then after lunch, then the B pod could then be continuing their work. And the academy has an X block that they're putting into the schedule that allows a great deal of flexibility for different things like that, where they could in many ways do things like that, even if not on a regular cyclical part of the cycle, but they could even do periodically. So I think your point is well taken, and just know that there are ways in which we might do that. It could be in the framework. It would be, I think, more about the teacher's ability with individual students to determine what's best for the class and what's best for the learning objectives at any given time. But in the big picture, we're going to be looking at how do we start the year off anyway. Those are things that are going to be slightly different as we get into this.
Alicia.
So I understand the ideology behind the week on, week off, but I'm going to have to circle back to something that Valerie said. And I do have serious concerns about kids not being in the building for 9 days in a row. And I say this knowing not all kids, but I have kids and I know kids who have trouble with transitions. And the idea that they would be an entire week in and then an entire week out is kind of terrifying. If you think about on a mass scale, having to teach kindergartners how to sit in a circle every other week, that seems troubling to me. It also seems like if there's a method to be able to put kids in the building for face-to-face contact in these smaller groups in a half day, 2 days a week. So again, the AA remote BB model. I guess what I'm trying to say here is there are so many things we're trying to maximize. We're trying to maximize health and safety. We're trying to maximize time on learning. We're trying to maximize for our youngest students all the way up to our oldest students. It doesn't look the same. We're not asking WA to reteach lively letters. It's not going to look the same for everyone. And I understand that we need to pick the framework from which all the other details will come. But I do want to say I'm still very much in support of an AA remote BB model so that we can put kids in the building more frequently so that there isn't a week gap between them actually being in the building and then spending a week remote.
I just think that, and I hear you and I understand that concern, but when we talk about the 9 days, that's why we kept coming back to the idea that with the AABB, there is 4 days guaranteed. There will always be at least 4 days with no contact. There will be no contact because when the teachers are teaching in a full day, they're not going to be able to connect with the remote students. And so the concern of that's why we like the idea of being able to make those daily connections. I agree with you that there are students that struggle with transitions, and we're going to be looking at all of that. As far as the safety net concerns that you're talking about, and that I think Valerie's also talking about, we are going to be working closely with all of the different attendance expectations and the regular synchronous connections that the remote students would be expected to participate in. We're going to know quickly if there's a problem that we're then going to be able to put our resources in to help support those students. So 9 days is not going to go by where we're not connecting with the student. Yes, physically they might not be coming into the building, but some of those students might be coming in depending on if they have special education services that might require them to come into the building to get a different type of service. So there is a whole different layer of all of those pieces that I think that play into that. And we are very mindful of it, and we're going to be watching it very carefully, because we also don't want anybody to go that amount of time without connections.
So to be clear, I'm not talking about a full day AABB. I'm talking about, compromise is the art of everyone leaving the table just a little bit unhappy. And I think if we can get to a place where we're addressing as many of the needs in as many of the ways possible, as much as I would love to see a full day, half day AABB is still something I think we should consider, because then Pod B gets in the afternoon, Pod A gets it in the morning, but then it's sort of trying to, and I know I'm a unicorn, it's trying to cobble together all of the best pieces and still address all of the issues that surround them.
I think, Alicia, to that point, I think the committee, the teaching and learning subcommittee and administrators feel very strongly about the half-day model. And I understand you're speaking about the half-day model too. And I think that would be our recommendation as the first priority to you if you were to deviate to a different model. I think, certainly whatever the pattern may be, I think our priority is half day. We could certainly make the AARBB work. It was a model that we put out there and talked about that as well, and still came back to this original recommendation for the reasons that Chris talked about. And we just think that the daily connection is so incredibly important. And we also think, because of so much positive feedback that has come, that the families that you are appeasing will then just pop up the other families who said, well, wait a minute, it only worked for me and you didn't hear from me because I liked it because it was the week on, week off, and that works for me. So we've just got to also be careful that from a balcony level point of view, that we're not just kind of swaying and changing things based on some of the problems that it's inevitable when you go to any hybrid model that it brings on some families. So whatever we can do to facilitate that and to assist with that, we are committed to it. I don't know what I'm going to do with my child personally. I don't have an option, not even thinking about it, but I have to. I'm in that same boat as these families. And it's not ideal. But so we did talk about that other piece too, felt that the everyday connection was most important, and knew in either model there will be a set of families who are going to have a lot of difficulty doing it because of mainly work schedules. That said, if the committee does choose to go in a different direction, I think we would all agree that what's most important to us is the half-day model more so than the week on, week off pattern, even though I do want to highlight that the AARB pattern was considered and we still stuck with the week on, week off, but that's probably the lesser of the two in terms of importance from the part of the committee.
So I agree with what Carrie is saying. I think we do have to pay very careful attention to the Wednesday cleaning. The cleaning that happens over the weekend, we can ensure that, the buildings will be ready for that next cohort. We just have to vet out the cleaning of the Wednesday to make sure we were ready to welcome that new group.
Hannah.
I don't know if this has been discussed, but would it be possible, like, for the A group to go in the mornings and then the B group to go in the afternoons, so then kids are there every day? Or is that not possible?
We did talk about that. That honestly is a transportation would be very difficult to get that many runs in the afternoons to then bring a whole group home and then be able to pick up a whole new group and then bring them back. We looked at that. We looked at different ways in which that could happen. But
And again,
that's when we came back down to the idea that it was better for them to be able to not have to come back into the building, or not for the other group to come in the afternoon.
Yeah, the cleaning again was another issue, having time to sanitize.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Getting ready for the next group.
Yeah, that's a very important issue, because we would not, in all likelihood, have the time to properly clean or disinfect surfaces.
Chris.
I want to come back a little bit to safety and protocol, and just, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment that I think this is maybe the most critical thing we do, along with professional development around the remote learning and things like that, but formulating our plans for how we are handling potential positive cases of COVID among our students and staff. You know, I feel like last week it wasn't real clear what we were using as close contact, and you know, I brought up what we saw in the DESE guidance. I want to urge us to be conservative. I want to urge us to be responsive, to be ready for positive cases, and I think, you know, and to be flexible. And I think with the Remote Learning Academy at WA, the way it's being proposed, that gives us so much flexibility that was a question mark. But I think we have to be conservative. We have to be responsive. And I think we have to assume that we are going to have positive cases, and that we have to assume that we are going to have to quarantine entire classes. And I think there's been a little bit of a reluctance to say that, or to maybe face that, but I want us to be as prepared as possible for that. And I know, I mean, we do have some time, and I think we've got the start, but I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we have, at least I haven't seen thorough enough plans and procedures for how to handle that in a way that I think meets the needs both of concerned families and staff, but also of just what the state is asking us to do. And one thing it keeps coming up in questions is the airflow, and how that works in the summer when there is no heating system running. So those filters aren't doing anything in these first few months of school. And so I know we talked last week about maybe having windows open and fans and things like that, but I think there's a little bit more to be answered there that I don't think we've heard, but I think we can answer those questions and have those plans in good shape before opening.
Chris, may I just say, I just received this today. This was a document that was produced by some of our nurses in collaboration with the Westford Health Department staff, and it addresses the specific protocols that you're talking about in terms of if a child or a staff member tests positive, if they test negative, what is the isolation period, what's the quarantine period. I'll be distributing this to all of you tomorrow. Now we may in fact need to tweak it a little bit if the committee as a whole feels that it should be. What the health department has repeatedly said to us is it's difficult to generalize situations, that every situation is kind of standalone and unique, but we do want to be as conservative and as careful as possible. I absolutely agree. And the air handling systems don't necessarily require heat to be running, circulating air. So, this company that we've contracted with, EFI Global, is an excellent company. And any of the repairs will be allocated to the CARES money that the town has received from the federal government. And we're going to take care of any deficiencies as quickly as possible before school starts.
Avery?
You have this document.
Oh, sorry, Bill.
So I just wanted to clarify something Chris just said about contact tracing and quarantining a whole class. Contact tracing is put into place if and when someone tests positive. And a close contact is someone who is less than 6 feet distant from a person for greater than 15 minutes. So I don't necessarily agree with Chris that an entire class will need to be quarantined. And I believe that the public health nurse last week said that Gail, and I've talked to school nurses who've clarified that. I mean, we'll need to fine tune that with our nurses. I also want parents who are nervous about the contact tracing and the positive tests to understand that this is a HIPAA situation. Just like we protect all of your students, any medical, emotional, academic, anything is protected. Testing positive for COVID also falls under that. And so just because a child in a class tests positive, not every parent in that class is going to be notified that there is a positive case in their class. It would only fall under the contact tracing. Again, I want to clarify all of that with the school nurses, but that is my understanding of protected information as well as the rudimentary guidelines of contact tracing.
Yeah, I agree, Avery. The health department has repeatedly said to us that we don't need to necessarily default to a full class or a school being quarantined. It could be just the students to the side and to the front and back of a student who tests positive, who are quarantined. So, but I've got that the nurses, our nurses who worked on this with the health department staff did an excellent job. I'll get this out to you tomorrow.
Everyone on the committee, it is yet again drawing late, and I appreciate everyone in the community who has stuck out through all of these really long meetings. I think these discussions are really valuable. I think we've covered a lot of good territory tonight. Where does the committee stand? Does anyone have any remaining questions before we actually need to face taking
and there is nothing all of us want more than to be back to, everyone says we're in unprecedented times. Can't wait till we return to precedented times. And as Principal Antonelli said on Friday, this too shall pass. So whatever we decide tonight, it's going to be tweaked along the way, and it is temporary. And I think there's a lot of questions to still be answered. There's a lot of details to still be worked out, but we have to start with a framework so that we can start moving forward to answer all of that. And it's not going to work for everyone. It's probably not even going to work for 2/3 of us. It's just, it is what it is, and we need to move forward. And unfortunately, we're in the position we're in with very little control, and I thank everyone for all of their input and their patience. And I want to reiterate what Gloria said at the beginning of the meeting. We will only get through this together. And I think moving forward is the only way we get through this together. So yeah, I think we might need to vote.
Well stated.
Chen.
Yeah, I totally agree with Anisha. I think we have been talking for the last 2 weeks non-stop, and then I appreciate all the emails from the parents, teachers, and then the conversation from the students. And then today, the administrator provide more details on the remote learning academy, and also putting some effort to address some of the concerns regarding the hybrid model. I would like to request actually the administrator to, because if you don't open school, you never have enough data to work with. So when we have the half-day hybrid, other districts have the full-day hybrid, make sure that we are actually keeping track of the data, because a lot of the discussion or a lot of the assumption is just assumption, because we have no data. We don't know if half day or full day, which one is the benefit and the risk analysis. We don't know which one will work for Westford. So keep that in mind, that we need to actually make sure we are nimble. We need to adjust. Definitely that we need to actually, I think the superintendent has an advisory committee, it needs to actually meet more often so that we can look into our model and then not the model of other districts, and then based on the data make proper adjustment, because the data is the only thing should drive our decisions. We are starting from somewhere, but we don't know if our analysis is correct, right? We throw a lot of the hypotheses out there when we come up with a plan, and the same thing is true for other districts.
Other committee comments? Am I missing any hands? Then I would suggest, and committee tell me if this makes sense, that the appropriate way to approach this vote is to take the recommendation that has been provided to us, and take a vote up or down on that recommendation. And I understand that different people have different concerns, but I think that's the primary question before us. And I think the task that we've really been asked for by administration is given the plan that is put before us, and we have asked them to re-examine it and reconsider it, and they are continuing with the initial recommendation, which is the half-day early release pod A, pod B, alternating week plan. I just want to make sure we're all clear that that's the hybrid model we are voting for, accompanied by the alternative remote learning academy for any student who elects it for any reason at their option. So the alternating hybrid model and the remote learning academy option for any student who elects it for any reason. Alicia?
Just a quick question, because I did bring up AARBB. Is there anyone else who feels like that is something that they would like to vote on? Just show of hands.
I think Gloria is trying to do it in a certain way. So let's let Gloria ask for this vote, and if we need to, then we can go to the next vote. Am I off base? I mean, I think by trying to vote on 3 different things, then we're confusing things.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to find a procedurally appropriate way to take such a vote, and I appreciate your input, Avery, as I haven't done this very often. Other thoughts from committee members? Is that an appropriate place to start with the vote that has been presented to us, the current recommendation? If that Bill, does that comport with what?
Yes, because
is?
My request of you is that you vote in the affirmative. What you vote is up to you, but my recommendation is for us to follow the reopening committee, particularly the teaching and learning subcommittee's recommendation of the hybrid model that has been proposed.
Okay, then for procedural purposes, I will make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the superintendent and our administration and reopening teams to implement the hybrid model as described in that document, with the remote learning alternative for any student who elects it. Do I have a second?
Second.
And voting in seniority order. Avery.
Aye.
Chris.
Aye.
Alicia. You're on mute, Alicia.
Abstain.
Ming Chen.
I support the hybrid, but and I appreciate what the work done by the administration, but I have to abstain because I have serious concerns.
Sean.
Aye.
Valerie,
Abstain.
and I would vote aye. So if I've done my math correctly, we have four yes and 3 abstentions. Am I correct, committee? Okay, thank you. Alicia, comments?
So to be clear, I abstain because I do still think the other one has merits, but this is our model and it is my full intention to put every ounce of energy I have behind making this model work. This is the model. I will be there every day to help answer questions, to work on things, and move forward from here because, like I said, we have to do this together.
I think the nature of this vote really does indicate, you know, 2 things. One, the difficulty of the topics we've wrestled with during this time, and 2, that while there are concerns, that ultimately we have to defer to and this was certainly the basis of my vote, that we do have to defer to the professional educators who have brought this forth. The community expressed concerns, we expressed concerns, and there does seem to be things in motion to try and provide a safety net and try and address some of the concerns that the community and the committee have both expressed with regard to the proposal. We know no plan is perfect. We know that no plan is going to make everybody happy. I know there are probably some people who are very happy with this vote, and there are some people who are probably very upset right now. I think Alicia's point is well taken, that we now all have to get behind this framework and work together to make this plan the best plan it can be. To that end, if the committee is still up for it at this late hour, Alicia and I, in anticipation of this moment and potentially this vote, did put together a resolution which encompasses a lot of recommendations from this committee regarding the implementation of the reopening plans. What we tried to do was summarize a lot of the committee and community concerns that we had felt were voiced, and we thought that this document, along with a vote from the committee about the plan, could really be our indication to administration about recommendations, concerns, suggestions we have, things that we hope that while now you have the framework, that as you build the complete model and as all of the pieces come together, that we're hoping that these are things you can take into account. I think a lot of them really do reiterate a lot of things we've already discussed, and a number of them are things that you've already heard from us and already incorporated into the planning. But if everyone's kind of up for this next step, we would like to present that resolution to the committee for your approval. Does that sound good? Okay, I'm going to try and figure out how to screen share and hope I don't mess that up.
The green button in the bottom.
Yep, got to get the right thing. Okay, sharing. Okay, is that viewable, everybody?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read this through, and if everyone's on board, I think the easiest thing might be to do it kind of town meeting style, and take a page out of the Ellen Hardy playbook. If you see something that you may or may not be in agreement with, or you want to ask a question about or make a comment on, call hold. And as I'm reading it through, Alicia, if you could keep track of anybody who calls a hold on a particular number. Does that sound okay? Everybody clear on that?
Can you make it a little bigger?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Let me see. Let me see how to do that.
I'm trying to adjust my glasses so
Yes.
it'll work.
Sorry.
If you could please say your name when you say hold, because we're all seeing Gloria's screen.
Yep. I'm just trying to figure out how to get this at page width. How about that? Better? Okay. All right. So proposed resolution by the Westford School Committee in support of recommendations for the reopening plan implementation. In support of the approved model, the committee would like to recommend and actively support the following resolutions to Westford Public School Administration in their implementation of the reopening plan, which includes both a hybrid model with an accompanying remote learning alternative for any student who elects it. Number 1, continued updates to the committee and the community regarding safety measures and protocols to support health and safety for all students and staff members, including purchases of necessary PPE, sanitizing supplies, or other safety needs, as well as updates regarding the HVAC study and any needed building remediation to improve airflow and quality. Number 2, for the hybrid model, prioritize the use of a geographical split rather than an alphabetical by last name method of determining the pods A and B, along with updates regarding bus routes, transportation protocols, and any needed adjustments to school start times. Number 3. Got that? Okay. That hold was Chris. Number 3, collaboration with town and community resources to help assist families with childcare needs, with special priority given to the needs of children in foster care, students experiencing homelessness, and low-income families who may qualify for other services and assistance such as free and reduced cost lunch, as well as families of essential workers and households with 2 working parents. Number 4, efforts to maximize remote learning academy options that connect students with Westford Public School teachers and community peers, including possible use of fully remote classes taught by Westford Public School teachers and/or use of audio and visual technology to reach in-person and remote learners simultaneously whenever possible. 5, support the needs of special education and ELL students, English language learners, in a way that is most appropriate for each child and addresses the accommodations and services in their IEPs and 504s where such determination will be made by the team and the parents as other IEP and 504 related decisions are made and according to current MGLs and best practices. Number 6, explore options for active engagement of kindergarten students on the days when they are designated to receive remote instruction to support their connection to learning and social emotional needs. I'm going to place a hold on that one. 7, after the initial 2 weeks of professional development for staff, consider the need for orientation style opening days to test run the variables laid out in the plan and to introduce staff and students to the new safety protocols. Number 8, explore the possibility of designating full-time substitute teachers for each building to maintain consistency in both education and implementation of safety protocols.
Sorry, can I retroactively hold on 7, I guess?
Absolutely.
Sorry, bit of a delay.
Yep, Valerie on 7. Anyone on 8? Number 9, allocate funds on a per diem basis for additional staff time in August to support the implementation of the reopening plan, which might include school nurses, guidance counselors, curriculum coordinators, special education team leads, and/or other staff members as needed to communicate with the public regarding reopening concerns and questions. I think I'd like to put a hold on that just so we can discuss it a bit, because it may be something that hasn't been discussed previously in a public meeting. Number 10, continued updates to the committee and the community regarding financial implications of the reopening plan and any needed changes to the FY21 budget. Number 11, establish a COVID-19 advisory committee as recommended by the superintendent that would also include a school committee member and school nurses from every level, K-5, 6-8, and 9-12, to monitor local and state health trends and to report on the implementation of the health and safety procedures in our schools and to recommend any changes as needed. And number 12, publish an evolving frequently asked questions on the district webpage with links to health and safety documents, schedules, metrics, Board of Health updates, etc., that will be created and then updated on a regular basis in response to parent and staff questions. Okay, Alicia, where did we have holds? Because goodness knows it's late and I've lost track.
Okay, your first hold is number 2, and that's Chris. Your second is number 6 for Gloria.
Okay, we'll do them one at a time because I'll forget. Chris, number 2.
I just wanted to ask if we want to leave some flexibility to the administration to kind of look at the full implications of a geographical split. I think it kind of first got raised. It got raised a couple of weeks ago, but I think last Wednesday we were sort of moving in that direction. But I don't know how much they've looked at the possible implications, whether it be class sizes or balancing out things in any certain way. I know there's a strong potential benefit for families who can use their proximity to, to do childcare and transportation, things like that. So I still am in favor of it. I just, wanted to leave at least some opportunity for the administration to either respond to that or to come back if there's a factor that maybe leans things one way or the other.
My thinking with this is that it did summarize the community feedback and committee concerns. I don't think it is intended to mandate the use of a geographical split, but rather to prioritize that. In my mind, the way it is phrased, if administration determines that there is a problem with the geographical split, they'd be more than free to come back to us and explain why they're changing it up and returning to the alphabetical. I thought this just summarized the committee's position. I'm completely open on this number or any other. If there are friendly amendments, if you think there's a more appropriate way that could be phrased or written, friendly amendments are completely welcome. But that to clarify for the committee and really the community at large, none of these are really intended to be to box the administration into one and only one solution for any of these issues, but really just to capture the entire totality of the whole process we've been on these last couple of weeks. And I know a number of these may seem obvious and are things that the administration would have naturally done anyway, but to put them all together for the committee and the community, we felt was helpful. So sorry, that was both a general answer.
Yeah, I'm happy leaving it as is as a recommendation and trust that it will be considered appropriately. Thank you.
Gloria, may I make a comment on number 1, please?
Sure, Bill.
I think we owe it, let's see, safety for all students. Continue updates committee. I think we ought to add specifically updates to the staff also? Continued updates to the committee, staff, and the community regarding, I mean, we certainly owe that to our staff if we're asking them to look in the buildings.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion, Bill. Absolutely. I'm editing live. Although I'm doing it poorly.
We could just say building staff, yeah, WPS staff, that's fine, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Mhm.
I assume that that doesn't change anyone's view on number one. I think that enhances it. Thank you very much. Where was our next hold?
Number 6, and it's you.
Number 6. Yeah, I think there's certainly been a recognition in the community and from the committee that kindergarten is a complicated aspect of this problem because we aren't able to really treat our kindergartners the same way that we treat our 1 through 12 because we do have this split model of half day K and full day K, and in this hybrid model that we're adopting, it's hard to envision how full day K could continue in the way that it has in the past. So I guess I just wanted to very much keep this on the list and as part of the discussion. And I'm wondering if we can, if Bill, you would be willing to put this on the agenda for our next meeting to really have a discussion about what are some of the possibilities for kindergarten since it is in kind of a special category, and does the committee have any options of ways that we can help support a model that works better for our youngest learners, if there are ways that we can help support that. I would just like to explore that further.
Yeah, sure.
What was next? Number
7,
Valerie?
and it's Valerie.
Yep.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to share a voice that, you know, if all things, I mean, if our community numbers are low and our air quality is good and everything, you know, I guess I just feel like I want to get the in-person happening as quickly as possible. You know, we kind of dance around this idea that everything could blow up by Halloween or by Thanksgiving or something. And so I just would really hesitate to kind of push out any more of that start. And, you know, the calendar that we approved last week had some orientation days for pre-K and K and grade 3 and grade 6 and grade 9. And I kind of hope that would just be enough and that we can start with as much, hit the ground running as much as possible on September 16th. So I don't know if this wording was going beyond 16th or not, but I guess I just wanted to clarify or voice that concern.
My interpretation of that, Valerie, is it does go beyond the 16th, and I do think that will happen sort of organically. It's just that I'm glad we didn't put any specific number of days because I think, as you alluded to, Valerie, we do need to pay attention to time and learning. But I do think this is going to happen sort of organically, and I don't think there's going to be a hard start. There'll be conversations of an orientation style over the first few days of the school year, particularly since when we start on the 16th, it's a Wednesday. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see that Wednesday and probably Thursday and maybe part of Friday a little bit softer in nature than what we ordinarily might see in a more conventional school year.
Alicia?
Excuse me. So this was sort of cobbled together from a bunch of the concerns from parents and staff, and school committee members all emailed Gloria with suggestions. And I think leaving it fluid is necessary, but I wanted to make sure we included it because you're absolutely right. It will happen organically. And I think in any given household, I could tell you how I think one of my children is going to react, and I could be completely wrong. And everything we've talked about so far has been on paper. And I think we need to allow for space for people to be comfortable with certain things. So I'm 100% behind leaving it open like that and absolutely recognizing that it may be a fluid, organic process. But I wanted to recognize that this is brand new for everyone, students, staff, everybody. And we're going to need to, extend a little grace to everyone to get us to the point where people find where they are comfortable.
You're muted, Gloria.
Thank you, Bill. Any thoughts from other committee members? Since I'm full screen right now, I can't see if somebody's waving at me sometimes. Are we comfortable, Valerie and Alicia, since you've spoken this? Oh, wait, I see a Sean hand. Sean? Was that a wave?
Sorry, I'm good.
Okay. Are Alicia and Valerie, are you comfortable with this wording? Would a tweak of consider the possible need or potential need, just to really give our indication to administration that we're in support of whatever they feel is necessary to establish those routines, also, in recognition that we know we are starting in a partial week with that Wednesday start. Any friendly amendment there, Valerie?
No, I mean, I think the pointing out the Wednesday is helpful. I guess I'm just anxious to get kids in the building.
Yeah, I think it helps to clarify that the intent of this, and Alicia, tell me if I'm misrepresenting it, is really those very few opening days to give the administration flexibility with what they feel like they need to do for those few opening days that week. We're not talking about a 3-4 week orientation. wasn't the intent of the recommendation.
Right. No, not at all.
Agreed. Okay.
The next one is 9, and it's the last one, and it's you, Gloria.
Yes, and I just wanted to bring this up with the committee. This was really something that developed out of a conversation that I had. I believe it was with you, Valerie, that we as a committee recognize the huge challenges facing our administration over the course of the next couple of weeks. We also recognize the anxiety from the community in wanting to be able to reach out and potentially have a conversation with, you may want to have a conversation with your own family doctor, but you might want to have a conversation with your school nurse about making the choices about what is most appropriate for your child. And there may be a lot of anxiety, at the high school level for students to maybe reach out and have a conversation with a guidance counselor. So, but we also understand that staff is not in the buildings, and we have a very limited summer staff who is in the buildings on a daily basis. So I guess we added this as a way of trying to offer to you, Bill, and the building administrators and central administrators, that if you feel like you have a need to offer to some of those staff members, that if they would be willing to come in on a voluntary basis and be paid, of course, for their time, and you could have a time that everyone knew that the middle school nurses were going to be available on this particular Thursday or Friday, and that the community could connect with them by phone or by email. If there's just something like that can help you have the staff you need to communicate effectively with the community, we want to be able to give you that flexibility and budgetary support.
I think that's very, very helpful. I'm just wondering if a qualifier on this one might help us a little bit in terms of allocate funds on a per diem basis for the possible need for additional staff time. In other words, it doesn't necessarily commit us to that, but it represents potential for that allocation of funds.
Valerie?
And Gloria, just to, I know you were just kind of given some examples, but one that we also brainstormed about was about staff, right? About staff, really connecting with their school nurse, and just kind of having that as a resource.
Yeah. I think the more information the staff has going into the school year, the smoother transition we're going to have.
Absolutely. So are we comfortable with this wording, or do we just want to say, as it, I can't remember exactly, allocate funds for additional staff time as needed, or if needed?
Needed. That would work for me.
That makes sense.
I mean, I think by putting that qualifier in there, it doesn't necessarily obligate us to those expenditures if it's not necessary.
Nope. Just really want you to have the support that you need for the tasks you have ahead, which we know are daunting.
Well, it's very much appreciated.
Any other comments, friendly amendments, questions? Sean?
Yeah, briefly, Gloria. I was just thinking of one towards the end, and I apologize. I wish I brought this up before the meeting, but I wonder if we should put something along the lines of, we've just asked a great deal of our staff, right, that they'll be returning in the fall. And I wonder if there's something that we can put to codify that in the form of, I know Alicia asked a good question about the Remote Learning Academy, and I know that this is getting ironed out in negotiations and the like, but do we put something along the lines of that, look, that in conjunction with the WEA, the administration will establish protocols or processes regarding eligibility for teaching positions within the Remote Learning Academy?
I think that might be taken care of by impact bargaining, Sean.
Yeah, I get it, Bill. I'm just, my whole point is to say that this is a resolution being passed by the school committee to hand off to the administration. Look, I mean, if it's being handled by other things, I'm perfectly fine with that. I guess it, in a way, it is redundant, but I thought it needed to be said.
Absolutely, point well taken and agreed. I think the committee recognizes the need to impact bargain with the WEA, and absolutely honors that. We know that we're putting plans in place that still need to be resolved and worked through with the union, and are committed to that process. I don't know exactly how it fits into the context of this, as this is our recommendation to administration. And we kind of have a separate negotiation ongoing with the union. So I'm not sure how to incorporate it here, but I believe it is a point well taken, and I'm glad we discussed it publicly. Other thoughts from the committee about whether we'd include it here or how?
I'm fine with it. I'm fine without it, Gloria. That's what I'm happy that we had the discussion. I think you're right. I think it probably makes sense for other discussions.
Thank you for raising it and recognizing it. I think it's absolutely worth recognizing while we're talking about the challenges that lay ahead for administration in putting together all of the plans over the next couple of weeks. It goes without saying that there are also extraordinary challenges facing our teachers to be teaching in, live environments and remote environments, and potentially both at the same time. And that I am so grateful, I think, because of that the state gave us and all school districts across the state the flexibility to have that 10-day professional development. I know for some parents and students, it must be agonizing for the start of school to have gotten kicked back by those 2 weeks, but I think it is so absolutely crucial for our staff. And I'm really glad that we can give them that gift of time to prepare, because I think it's really needed. So I'm thrilled about that.
Gloria, may I make a comment on the last one, which is the frequently asked questions?
Absolutely.
Excellent suggestion. It's just, I'd like to have an opportunity for us to discuss how best to make that happen. The only reason I say that is between now and the opening of school, we're not going to be up to our eyeballs and we're going to be up to the ceiling in work. And we want to make this a reality. It's just that I'm trying to think of, I'd like to talk with all of you or you, Gloria and Alicia, on how we can make this happen without siphoning off a lot of our work time on the necessary meetings we need to have over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, I don't think there was any intent to create an administrative burden with this, but rather in some sense, I would hope it would be alleviating an administrative burden if there is one set place where people can go to maybe address a question. I think there have been numerous times that we've seen a question come across in email to all of us that maybe was answered someplace else, or was answered in the context of a meeting, or was answered in the context of the 90-page report. And so I think this was really intended to alleviate an administrative burden and not create one.
Yeah. And I wasn't, please don't misunderstand. I wasn't referring to it as an administrative burden. It's just that just interested in how we can make this happen most efficiently.
Suggested amendments for how we revise this in a way that's incorporated, or are we comfortable with the language given the discussion we just had?
Yeah.
What do people think?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. We can just talk it out in terms of how we best make it happen.
Sure, I'm absolutely comfortable with that. Alicia, that sound good? I know this. I think this was one that came out of one of your concerns. So, yep, I'm getting a thumbs up. Okay. Any other questions, holds, comments from committee members? Just
probably, I don't know if it's a procedure or just question. Is that this resolution is it's just a resolution. It's non-binding, right?
It is a resolution on behalf of the committee. If we vote to adopt it, that it is our directive in some sense to administration, that we it is our aspiration, it is our hope that these considerations can be taken into account during their planning and implementation phase. And again, as I indicated earlier, and want to reassure Bill and administrators, none of it is intended to box them in any way or micromanage them in any way, but really to just capture the whole totality of the discussion that we've had over the last couple of weeks in one document that I hope is helpful to summarize both for the administration, staff, community, parents, everyone, to see kind of where we as a committee will hope that we can remain engaged and actively support the administration as we move forward with these plans.
Got it. Thank you.
Motion to adopt the resolution as we've amended with our discussion here tonight.
Second.
Can you stop sharing your screen so we can see everybody?
Yeah, sorry. There we go. Okay, hi everybody again. So did I get a second? I thought I heard.
John seconded it.
Okay. Any other discussion? Voting, Avery. Oh, can't hear you, Avery.
Valerie had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed the hand. Nope.
No? I thought I saw you put your hand up. Okay.
Thank you.
I like the idea, but I'm going to abstain because I don't think we need a resolution to tell the administration how to do things.
Chris?
Aye.
Alicia?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Ming Chen?
Aye.
Valerie?
Aye.
And I'm also in favor. So did I get everybody? 6 in favor, 1 abstention? Okay. Do any other questions, comments, business before we adjourn?
May I just say thank you for your very thoughtful questions, your very thoughtful discussion. This was one of the most difficult times any school committee could have, and you've done it with great dignity.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for your support. I know that the final vote, because it is not anything that will be able to please everybody, is a very difficult thing to do. You pushed us to think longer and think harder and dissect it even further, and that has been a great exercise. And so we do look forward to the direction now, and I just want to thank everybody for their support on behalf of the team of teaching and learning.
I want to make one comment. So, I really appreciate the administration and also the community for what hard work, and then the committee. I hope that we can actually have the re-evaluation of our data like once a month or so, so that with the goal, like when the time or conditions it become favorable, we can actually go back to school.
Here's hoping for that. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time, for your patience, for your understanding, for your hard work, professionalism. Thank you everyone across the board. Any other final thoughts, or are we at motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And Avery?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Alicia?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Ming Chen?
Aye.
Valerie?
Aye.
And aye. That is unanimous. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Ming Chen?
Aye.
Valerie?
Aye.
And aye. That is unanimous. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Ming Chen?
Aye.